Welcome to video number 6 in the study course on the Book of Revelation. Chapters 8 through 10 will be explored. The last seal is removed from the scroll. 7 angels are given 7 trumpets. Trees and grass are burnt up. A mountain is cast into the sea. 2 stars fall from heaven. There are locusts with stingers like scorpions, and that's just some of the imagery we will encounter. What can all that mean? We will find out. It's a long video. Pace yourself. Take some breaks, but please keep at it. This is the table of contents for the whole course on the Book of Revelation. There are 12 videos in all. This is the overall plan for the course. I don't recommend skipping any of the videos. Now this video covers chapters 8, 9, and 10, and this video, as you see within the pink box, is video number 6 in the series. Note that this video's table of contents is located in the description of the video. The description is located under the video title on YouTube. Some instructions how to access the description are on the next slide. This explanation uses a different one of my videos on YouTube as an example. You can see the video's title here below the video screen. This video's title is Interpretations of Nebuchadnezzar's Statue Are Wrong. Now the arrow is pointing to the description of that video. Only a couple lines of the description are shown. Then, if there is more to the description, you'll see 3 dots and the word More. Click on the word More to access the full contents of the description. That is where you'll find any links to other videos or websites or other information that I mention in this video. You probably will need to copy the website address and paste it into your internet browser. I don't believe YouTube allows direct links. The principal resources used for some foundational information for this video include these: the Holy Bible, primarily the King James Version, a book called Apocalypse Secrets by Dr. John Abel. Note, if you try to purchase it, order the 2nd edition. Understanding the Revelation to St. John by Dr. Alan D. Clark. The book is now out of print, as noted on the slide. About 90% of this course is based on Dr. Clark's book. I quote him so often and so extensively that I do not put them all in quotation marks. Just assume, unless I state otherwise, unless I'm explicitly quoting something else, that I am probably quoting or paraphrasing Dr. Clark's book. Please also note that Dr. Clark bases most of his interpretation of the Revelation on the Bible itself, with some augmentation from the Bahá'í faith texts. Also, the sacred and authoritative texts of the Bahá'í faith. Some of those texts are shown in the yellow box in the lower left. Plus the many other books I've studied over 3 decades of my interest in the Bible prophecies, added to the database of these videos. All the tables, graphs, and other graphics were provided by me. Note that this course is primarily based on Dr. Clark's book, as I mentioned, and his book is solidly based upon the Holy Bible, as I mentioned, with some writings from the Baha'i faith added. Book of Revelation's most important prophecies at this point in time are the predictions of these 2 entities referred to as the Lamb with the capital L that denotes his divine station, and the second entity is he who sits on the throne. Note that he who sits on the throne is also referred to as him who sat on the throne, or one who sits or sat on the throne. In the last 7 or so chapters of Revelation, this entity is sometimes referred to as the glory of God. It is he who is the King of Kings, as referred to elsewhere in Revelation. Keeping the book of Luke, chapter 9, verse 26 in mind, the Lamb, the Christ Spirit returned in the station of the Son of Man, and he who sits on the throne is the Christ Spirit returned in the station of the Father. These two entities are also known as the Lamb is the Elijah figure foretold in the book of Malachi chapter 4 verse 5, which tells us that Elijah will appear before the Messiah. Then the Messiah of the latter days is he who sits on the throne. Now, I will tell you that we adherents to the Bahá'í faith believe that these two divine figures have already appeared in the world back in the 1800s. The Elijah figure is a person called the Bab, which means the door or gate in English. The Messiah is a man called Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. Now you can choose to not believe our interpretation. You will hear references to them in these videos of the course on Revelation, but you can just ignore them, yet you will still gain a great deal of knowledge about the book of Revelation anyway, an amazing amount of information. It will be worth your time if you really want to know about the book of Revelation. You can just go with the theory that these two divine figures have not yet appeared as you watch the videos. This is a timeline of the 1800s and where key events in the life of the Bab and Baha'u'llah occurred. In case you were wondering about the timeline of events in chapters 6 and 7, as the Lamb and he who sits on the throne prepare to appear on earth. At the top left, you can see that Baha'u'llah, he who sits on the throne, was born in Tehran, Persia on November 12, 1817. Looking below the timeline, you can see that the Bab was born 2 years later on October 22, 1819, in Shiraz, Persia. The next thing on the timeline as we go right is the declaration of the Bab of his divine identity and purpose. That was on May 22, 1844. Next, as we go to the right, we see that the Bab was martyred on July 9, 1850, at the age of 31. He truly was a sacrificial lamb foretold in Revelation. Next, on the timeline as we go right, Baha'u'llah publicly declared his divine identity in April of 1863, and then the event of Baha'u'llah's passing at the age of 75 in 1892 in the Holy Land outside of Akka. This is the timeline for the third chronological cycle in the book of Revelation, which contains the 8th, 9th, and 10th chapters. The timelines for each chapter are connected end to end to form this graphic. Note that the chapter numbers are in the yellow boxes at the beginning of the pertinent segment. We start a new chronological cycle with chapter 8, but it does not continue from the previous chapter. This time we start with either the Christian faith or Judaism, depending on whether you agree with Dr. Clark's interpretation or mine, as we will discuss shortly. Then it covers the pure Islam, that's the medium green boxes, then the corrupted version of Islam, the pale green boxes, then the revelation of the Lamb, who is the Bab, the lavender boxes, then that of he who sits on the throne, Baha'u'llah, the purple box on the far right. Here I have depicted the 7 chronological cycles in the book of Revelation to remind you of the context of the time cycles. You can see in the middle on the right an arrow pointing to chronological cycle number 3, which includes those chapters 8 through 10. Note that each cycle ends with a purple rectangle which depicts the presence of the new Messiah, the returned Christ Spirit, at that point in the cycle. In the text of those verses, that is he who sits on the throne, who is Baha'u'llah. The beginning of each cycle varies. The second cycle, if you would note, is chapters 6 and 7, actually. And it begins with Judaism. The cycles rearrange and refocus after the end of each cycle. The next cycle will begin with one of the topics listed here, but may drop one or more religious topics from the previous cycle. The third cycle begins with either Judaism or Christianity. That's the one that Dr. Clark and I disagree about the beginning of the cycle. Not a great disagreement, just a few minor things. The fourth cycle, chapter 11, all by itself, it begins with pure Islam. Again, that's the green box. The fifth cycle begins with corrupted Islam, that's the light green, and it contains chapters 12 through 16. The sixth cycle with corrupted Islam, again, it contains chapters 17 through 20. Chapters 21 and 22 are the seventh cycle, which begins and ends with He who sits on the throne, Baha'u'llah, the Messiah of the latter days. That's why it's all purple. If you're interested in knowing more how these chronological cycles were discovered and how they were put together, you can watch video number 12 of this course. It has the full story. Next, we'll talk about the scroll with 7 seals, and here it is. The artwork looks like a loaf of French bread with slices of pepperoni on it, but we will go with the idea that it's actually that scroll that the Lamb has agreed to remove the 7 seals from, one by one. In Chapter 6, video number 4 in the course, we went through what happened when the first 6 seals were removed. We are now getting ready in the first verse of Chapter 8 to experience what happens when that last seal is removed. To be fully prepared, we need to bring all those threads together about the seals before we proceed, which we are going to do next in a brief review of what happened when seals 1 through 6 were removed. Through the removal of each of the 7 seals, that which has not been understood in all the holy revelations of the past becomes clear. The 7 seals may represent the 7 religions. The release of all 7 seals reveals the meanings of all past scriptures. Those faiths are from the same God, after all. So what were the effects of the removal of seals 1 through 3? Their removal emphasizes the greater covenant of God in the 3 religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Specifically, that God periodically sends his messengers, the prophets of God, to convey his divine teachings to humanity. If you recall from chapter 6, when those first 3 seals were removed, the white horse and rider, the red horse and rider, and the black horse and rider appeared. Those horses and riders symbolized those 3 religions. Humanity, in order to be faithful to that greater covenant, must recognize and obey those messengers. To clarify, the greater covenant of God is between God and the manifestation of God he sends to humanity. For instance, God made a covenant with Abraham to provide blessings to humanity through Abraham's descendants. This has been fulfilled through Jesus Christ, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, all descendants of Abraham. There are some theories that Buddha and Zoroaster also descended from Abraham. And the lesser covenant, which is between a manifestation of God and his followers, regarding who will be the designated leaders and organization of his faith community after his passing from this world. Examples of this is when Moses designated Joshua to be his successor as head of the Israelites. The removal of seal number 4 warns of the usurpation of the correct leadership of Islam by the corrupt Umayyad and Abbasid clans, resulting in the split of Islam into the Sunni and Shia sects of Islam. This is a violation of the Lesser Covenant provided by Muhammad regarding the leadership of Islam. Those corrupt Umayyad and Abbasid clans inject all forms of their corruption into the faith of Islam, which greatly diminish the divine spiritual benefits of that faith of God. With the removal of the fourth seal, the focus is on the devastating consequences of the violation of that lesser covenant, death of the spirit of faith in religion. With the removal of seal number 5, it is explained to us that there have always been attacks upon the new messengers of God when they appear, and a warning is given that when the new faith is delivered to humanity, the early believers of that new faith will also be persecuted. Those who were killed will join the ranks of their fellow martyrs, as we learned in chapters 6 and 7. Removal of seal number 6. Cosmic, earthly, and spiritual signs announce the returned Christ Spirit. Indications are given that the Lamb and He who sits on the throne will dwell on earth for at least a period of time. Warnings are given to the kings, rulers, and religious leaders of Persia, which is predominantly Shia Islam, and Middle East areas of predominantly Sunni Islam population, that the four winds of God will soon be unleashed upon them. If you are interested in a more detailed review of the signs of the coming of the Christ Spirit returned, there is a video on YouTube titled Signs of Apocalypse that provides a full review of the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 29 through 31 prophecies of the signs that would foretell the return of the Christ Spirit. Included in that video is evidence that the events before, during, and after the lives and teachings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah have, indeed, fulfilled these prophecies. We now begin Chapter 8 and chronological cycle number 3. Do we begin this cycle with Judaism or Christianity? There are at least two viewpoints on this, Dr. Clark's and my own. It is not that important in the scheme of things, actually. After all, these are events that occurred starting about 2,000 years ago or so, and lots of what is now history has transpired since then. But I thought I'd include those two versions of the chronology for you to consider for yourself. This is a grid that shows the 22 chapters and 404 verses of the book of Revelation. The chapter numbers are shown vertically in the yellow boxes on the left, with chapter 1 at the top and chapter 22 at the bottom at the far left. The verses are horizontal, so each white box is a verse in the indicated chapter. There are 3 rows showing the verse numbers. That's the pink shaded rows. The grayed out boxes towards the right indicate that the chapter has less than 29 verses. Thus, a gray box means there is no such verse in the indicated chapter. Now, I entered the text from chapter 8 in this row in the Excel file. Then I color-coded each verse by the topic in the text in chapter 8. A medium blue for Judaism, a light blue for Christianity, and a medium green for Islam. Each rectangle in this row, where the red arrow is pointing, is a verse in chapter 8. And this is my version. I am the narrator. I realize you cannot read any of the text in the boxes. That is partly why I used a color coding system. You can easily differentiate the verse topic by its color. The medium blue boxes are those I think are addressing issues within Judaism in this chronological cycle at the very start of the cycle. Going to the right on this timeline. As you get to the light blue boxes, the focus of the text shifts to topics within early Christianity. The exact shift from Judaism to Christianity is kind of fuzzy. That is understandable, I think, because the events in each were in the same location and time frame. Events were very interwoven in history. The leaders of Judaism directly affected the events in the life and death of Jesus Christ and affected his followers. Where the green arrow is pointing is the fuzzy section. Where does Judaism end and Christianity begin? I don't know. That might be something for people to investigate in the future. I devised this version below to perhaps illustrate this interweaving of events in these faiths. The color coding shows the overlapping of the events. If you can see color, I am sorry for colorblind people that cannot differentiate. Dr. Clark, the author of the book Understanding the Revelation to St. John, upon which this study series is based, his version would be more like this at the top. Note the color coding indicates that he believes that those light blue verses are all about Christianity. He could be quite correct. He is the expert and I'm just a perpetual student of Bible prophecies. And, as I mentioned, in the scheme of things in the book of Revelation, it is just not that important as all these verses in chapter 8 are about the distant past. Removal of that last seal is next. And we start chapter 8 with verse 1, quote, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven, about the space of half an hour." End quote. What is the significance of that last seal being removed? The scroll can now be opened and the messages inside revealed. These messages will have great impact on the religious world. There is one other difference of opinion between Dr. Clark and I about the meaning of the silence in heaven for about half an hour. Dr. Clark's view is that the silence in heaven, when the seventh seal is removed, is about the martyrdom of the Bab, who is the one removing the seventh seal. My view is that this silence in heaven is about the heavenly reaction to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Dr. Clark equates this half an hour at the very beginning of chapter 8 to the 3 years between the martyrdom of the Bab in mid-1850 and 1853 when Baha'u'llah received his divine summons. Thus, Dr. Clark believes this 3-year period after the Bab's 6-year dispensation, in which no revelation was forthcoming, is likened to the silence in heaven. The hour is the time of the appearance of a prophet of God. Thus, the 3-year period was half of the Bab's dispensation, thus half an hour. Now, an alternative view of the meaning of verse 1, which is my view. The hour is the appearance of a prophet of God. No difference at all from Dr. Clark's view there. My view is that what caused the silence in heaven was the event of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The hour was the advent of Jesus Christ. The shock and dismay felt by the early Christians was also felt in heaven. The 3 days after his death that left his followers bereft and rudderless was part of that silence. On the 3rd day, his followers finally came to the realization that they must carry on Christ's mission and teach the faith. This spiritual shock is what caused that brief time of silence in heaven. The chapter begins with extensive and repetitive condemnations of the Jews for their having rejected Jesus as their foretold Messiah. Thus the Jews broke their covenant with Moses. Moses had promised that there would be a prophet sent to the Jews who would arise among them. When they failed to recognize this prophet, they broke that covenant. Although chapter 8 began with the crucifixion, the next several verses were about the Jewish people. That is why I believe that those first 6 or 7 verses are principally about Judaism. Then in verses 6 or 7 or 8, somewhere in there, the topic seems to become more about some of the earliest important happenings in Christianity. Then in verse 10, events that occurred around 300 Common Era in Christianity that were also along the lines of the breaking of a covenant are described. Again, Dr. Clark may be correct. These differences are rather moot at this point in time, since that chronological cycle is about events that already happened centuries ago. No big deal. The main messages of the rest of the verses are still very applicable, however, as you will see. Moving on. So the scroll is now unleashed. The last seal has been removed. The entire scroll can now be read. By virtue of the Lamb removing the 7 seals from the scroll, humanity has been provided with the necessary capacity to understand and utilize a greater measure of the revelation of God. The world has been prepared to understand and, therefore, utilize the revelation which will be bestowed upon humankind by the returned Christ. The world was thus prepared for him. Spiritual conditions and events are foretold in prophecies in chapters 8 through 10. By the removal of the last seal on the scroll, divine mysteries hidden within the revelations of Abraham through Muhammad have now been made clear. Disclosure of the remaining prophetic sequences of the book of Revelation was made possible. What these prophecies in chapters 8, 9, and 10 describe are the birth pangs of the Christian faith, including the effects of wormwood on it, the appearance of Muhammad and the Islamic faith, the assassination of Muhammad's chosen successors, the Imams of the Shia Islam, and perversion of his teachings by those who unlawfully seized the reins of divine authority. The fall of Constantinople to Muslim forces is foretold. This changed the religious and secular power structure of the Middle East. The verses will also foretell where and when the Christ Spirit will appear. The new name of the returned Messiah will be given. Then, of course, more events involving the Lamb and He who sits on the throne, the Bab and Baha'u'llah respectively, in chapter 10. That ends the 3rd time cycle. More impacts of the removal of the 7th seal. It allows humanity to recognize the events that will herald the Messiah when he returns. Failing this recognition, it provides for a comparison between actual historical events and those which have been prophesied to occur. Using this comparison, those who have missed the second advent can recognize the fulfillment of the prophecies in the appearances of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Verse 2, quote, "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets." End quote. The prospect of 7 trumpets sounding is reminiscent of the 7 trumpets that brought down the walls of Jericho. Joshua ordered that 7 trumpets be carried by 7 priests behind the Ark of the Covenant as his forces surrounded the city of Jericho. This procession circled Jericho once each day for 7 days, sounding the trumpets as they went. On the 7th day they sounded the trumpets 7 times. This sounding was followed by the shouts of the Israelites. The combined effect of this process caused the walls of Jericho to collapse. thus placing Jericho residents at the mercy of the Israelites. Dr. Clark points out that there are some striking similarities between the 7 priests with trumpets in the Jericho story and the 7 angels with trumpets in the Revelation story. In row 1, column A, the 7 priests followed Joshua's orders and blew their trumpets that brought about the destruction of the walls of Jericho, allowing the Israelite forces to conquer the city. In row 2, column A, the 7 angels of Revelation blew their trumpets to bring destruction to the world of man. These are very similar. Now let's look at column B in row 1. Note that the 7 priests cannot blow the trumpets for the final 7 times until the 7th day of preparation is done. And below that, note that the 7 angels cannot blow their trumpets until the removal of the 7th seal. Of course, another similarity is simply the blowing of the horns in both stories. What is the significance of those similarities? According to Dr. Clark, it emphasizes obedience to the lesser covenant. The walls of Jericho needed to be prepared in order to bring about their collapse on the 7th day, so that the kingdom of Israel could be established. In the Revelation story, mankind needed to be prepared with the revelations of those 7 religions of God before the world would be ready to establish God's kingdom on earth. In this Revelation story, chapter 8, verse 2, the angels are prepared to blow their horns when called upon. The people on earth have to be prepared for the events that will occur once the angels' trumpets are sounded. When the 7 priests circled the city of Jericho, they were preceded by the Ark of God, the very embodiment of the covenant of God. The Israelites were successful in overthrowing Jericho because they were obedient to the lesser covenant given them by Moses. That is, they were obedient to Joshua, the appointed successor of Moses. Through obedience to this covenant, they were assisted by God in their efforts to establish the kingdom of Israel. We shall soon see that the lessons the angels teach are concerned with the 2 covenants, the lesser covenant and the greater covenant. Verses 3 through 5, quote, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake." End quote. Just for your information, a censer is a container in which incense is burned, typically during a religious ceremony. And in Bible prophecies, the use of the adjective golden may denote that this censer is divine in origin. Now, if it had been described as light gold, or it was of some metal that can tarnish, it is possible that there is an intent to appear divine in origin, but is not really. Another FYI, if something is described as wearing a crown, but it is not a gold crown, that entity is perhaps an earthly human king, not a spiritual king like Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Lamb, or he who sits on the throne. They would be wearing golden crowns for sure. So if, as you read the Bible prophecies, if a crown is mentioned, pay close attention to whether it is gold or not. If it does not say it is golden, then the wearer is most likely just a human being. If it states that the crown is like gold, that can mean that the wearer is trying to appear divine, but is not. The same with the golden altar which was before the throne. Obviously, this scene is a heavenly scene, thus divine, and it's a golden altar. Let's look at the phrase, quote, "The angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth," end quote. A Bible story sheds some light on the meaning, that of the story of Korah and covenant breaking. Moses had designated Aaron and his descendants to be the priestly class in Moses' faith. In Numbers chapter 16, the story of Korah and his 250 cohorts was described. They challenged Moses and Aaron by trying to claim the status of priest. This was a violation of the lesser covenant of Moses. Moses told this group of 250 to gather at the tabernacle of meeting and to bring their censers filled with incense to present themselves before the Lord. The 250 each lit the incense in their censers and stood at the door of the tabernacle. Moses had this group separate themselves from their families and from other attendees so that the faithful were in one area, the families in another, and these 250 covenant breakers in a third area. The earth opened up and swallowed up the families of the covenant breakers. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed the 250 covenant breakers. Now that we know how important it is for believers to be faithful to the covenants, both the lesser and the greater, we can now understand verses 3 through 5 better. The golden censer filled with the pure fire from the heavenly altar and was cast down to the earth is symbolic of the divine process, which is both retributory and purifying. It represents the removal and destruction of those who violate the covenant of God and who desire to rise up to take what is not lawfully theirs, the authority which God has given to another. Then we get to this phrase, "There were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake." The voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake symbolize the violations of the covenant by the Jews, especially the clergy who failed to follow the instructions of Moses. How did they fail to follow the instructions of Moses? Moses prophesied the Christ in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15, quote, "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken." End quote. The Jews failed to follow Moses' instruction, thus broke the covenant. Let's go back to the phrase, "The angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth." The angel filled the censer with the fire of the altar. One way of looking at this, please consider, is this censer being filled with the fire of the altar may signify the Christ, Jesus Christ being the fire of the altar, and it being cast into the midst of Judaism with the resultant covenant-breaking actions by the leaders of Judaism when they rejected their Messiah. Chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, quote, "And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up." End quote. First, we need to define the terms tree and grass when found in prophecies. Trees represent great men of power and influence, especially leaders of religion. Often they can symbolize kings and rulers. A tree is a person of exceptional qualities. Some examples: the prophet Jeremiah was depicted as a tree. That's in Jeremiah chapter 11, verse 19. The royal house of Israel was symbolized as a cedar tree. That's in Ezekiel chapter 17. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, was called a great tree. That's in the book of Daniel chapter 4. These verses tell the tale how man can be a tree. From Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 7 and 8, quote, "Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be a tree planted by the waters, and that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall cease from yielding fruit." End quote. And grass symbolizes the common man and woman. You see 3 Bible verses that explains this. Let's see what those Bible verses state. First, Psalm number 103, verse 15, quote, "As for man, his days are as grass, as the flower of the field, so he flourisheth." End quote. Here's another reference from the Old Testament as to the meaning of grass. Note that there are some verses in the New Testament that quote or closely paraphrase this quote from Isaiah. And that's from chapter 37, verse 27, quote, "Therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up." Then there's Isaiah chapter 40, verses 6 through 8, quote, "The voice said, Cry, and he said, What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, because the Spirit of the Lord bloweth upon it. Surely the people is grass. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever." End quote. Green grass, the common people, is symbolic of those souls who are brought to life by the pure waters which rain down out of the heaven of God's utterance. They are described as being withered in the blasts of God's wrath when they are unfaithful, and thriving when planted near the soft flowing waters of his utterance. A tree is likened to a blessed man who is planted by the waters. Green grass is symbolic of those souls who are brought to life by the pure waters which rain down out of the heaven of God's utterance. Trees, too, depend on those pure waters from heaven. If they do not get refreshing pure water, those plants will die spiritually. Water is symbolic of the Word of God. Imagine immersing yourself in an ocean. Feel the warm water surround you. Hear the lapping of the waves and their calming motion and cadence. Now imagine being outdoors in a hailstorm with frozen bits of water pummeling you. Immersing yourself in the ocean of the Word of God is soft flowing water and is spiritual nourishment. Obeying the Word of God is part of the deal. However, breaking the covenant brings punishment from God. In these verses, hail represents that punishment. It is water from heaven, but frozen by the disobedience of the believer. Obviously, it can be a harsh, destructive torment. A third part of the trees were burnt. Gives you quite a visual of a forest fire. But if you read Ezekiel chapter 5, God destroys a third part of this and a third part of that, etc., as part of the punishment of the Israelites for their bad behavior. Not to diminish it, but be aware that the third part appears to mean, in general, a significant part of the mentioned group or city, not a set, precise mathematical amount of 1/3. So we have this clause in verse 7 that after the first angel sounded the trumpet, there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. The hail and fire being loosed upon the earth is an indication that this trumpet blast was a warning about the breaking of the covenant. The third part of the trees burning up is a condemnation of the Jewish clergy who rejected the Messiah, who appeared exactly as Moses had foretold. Having the hail and fire mingled with blood indicates that the punishment would include sacrifice and/or violence, perhaps physical death. This is a quote from the writings of the Bab, the Lamb of Revelation. Quote, "By the righteousness of him who is the absolute truth, were the veil to be lifted, thou wouldst witness on this earthly plane all men sorely afflicted with the fire of the wrath of God, a fire fiercer and greater than the fire of hell, with the exception of those who have sought shelter beneath the shade of the tree of my love, for they in very truth are the blissful." End quote. The Bab is telling us that if we believe in him, we are protected from the wrath of God, a fire fiercer and greater than the fire of hell. But we are not protected if we disbelieve. It was also stated that all green grass was burnt up. It was not just the clergy who broke the covenant. The common man and woman also felt the fire of the wrath of God for following the rejection of Jesus Christ as the Messiah by their leaders. Green grass would denote the faithful common people. They were misled by the trees and did not follow their own investigation of the verity of the claims of the Christ. They rejected their Messiah because their leaders did. Thus, they too were burnt up. This is another quotation from the Bab. Quote, "If thou hast decided to shed my blood, wherefore dost thou delay? Thou art now endowed with power and authority. For me it will prove an infinite bounty conferred by God, while for thee and for them that would commit such an act, it will amount to a chastisement meted out by him." End quote. The Bab is warning the people who are about to kill him that their actions would be their punishment. Verses 8 and 9, quote, "And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed." End quote. When you see the word mountain or mountains in prophecies in the Bible, it is probable that it is symbolic of a religion or religions. In our prophecy in verse 8, this mountain is not a literal mountain. It is the religion of Judaism that is on fire due to the wrath of God and is being cast away from God's love and protection as a result of their disobedience to the covenant. Another comparison to mountains is in Jeremiah chapter 51. God states that Babylon, codenamed Leb Kamai, is a mountain which causes the destruction of all the earth, and which itself shall be burnt. Note that the prophet Jeremiah had been captured in Judah during Nebuchadnezzar's conquering of it and taken as a prisoner back to Babylon. The use of the term Babylon represents religious authorities who have corrupted the teachings of the messengers of God or opposed those messengers of God when they appear. To clarify, the term Babylon is not in this verse, but the allusion to a mountain cast into the sea is a possible reference to Babylon. Later in Revelation, Babylon is directly mentioned as a source of corruption. Just an FYI here, Babylon is referred to as the wilderness of the sea in the book of Isaiah. Perhaps this is the sea that the mountain is cast into, the area of Babylonia. Yet another view of the mountain being thrown into the sea. Think of the burning bush on Mount Sinai that attracted Moses to investigate. Thus, the burning mountain may be an allusion to the faith of Judaism specifically. These two separate comparisons of the mountain to Babylon and to Judaism can both be correct. Thus, Judaism, after their rejection of God's messenger to them, is being compared to Babylon. Jesus invited new believers to fish, meaning to teach. You fish in the sea. Thus, the sea is the arena of teaching. The ships mentioned later in verse 9 may be referring to the venues of teaching the faith of Jesus the Christ. Next, the phrase, "the third part of the sea became blood." A third part means a significant part of this arena of teaching the faith of Jesus became the scenes of harassment and or violence due to the covenant-breaking behavior against them, or those arenas of teaching otherwise became unfit for teaching. Then this phrase, "the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died." This describes that there were many who were believers, but due to the harassment and violence against them, their faithfulness languished and died. This is spiritual life and death in the verse, although in later years of this first phase of the evolution of Christianity, some did lose their physical lives as well. The Jewish rebellion against Rome resulted in a great reduction in the number of Jews living in the Palestine area, from both emigration to escape the conflict and from the war itself. In 66 Common Era, the Jews rebelled against Rome. They were dealt with severely. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed along with various centers of resistance, such as Masada, that occurred around 72-73 Common Era. The temple, that's Herod's temple, and those who sought sanctuary within it were destroyed by fire in 70 Common Era. The historian Flavius Josephus estimated that over 1 million Jews were killed by sword, famine, or disease during the rebellion. Approximately 97,000 were taken away captive. Note that many Christians escaped this as they had left the Jerusalem area due to the warnings from Jesus Christ about the destruction of the temple and other clues. Many view what happened to the Jews as the divine retribution against them for the fate of their Messiah, the Christ. Jesus foretold this destruction of Jerusalem in Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. For clarity, I'll use the New International Version wording. And Jesus is speaking here. Quote, "When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers! There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." End quote. And Jesus specifically foretold the destruction of Herod's temple in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. Quote, And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to shew him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. End quote. Through this destruction, a significant portion, a third part, of the arena of teaching, that's the sea, the land of Israel, was lost to Christendom. Verses 10 and 11, quote, And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter. End quote. We will focus on this phrase, there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. So the trumpet sounds, another violation of the covenant is announced. This violation is idol worship. Reminder, these verses are about the early Christian church and how it was negatively affected by a king. We need to go to Deuteronomy chapter 29, wherein Moses speaks at length about the need to follow the words of the covenant. He mentions one reason why in verse 9, quote, Keep therefore the words of this covenant, and do them, that ye may prosper in all that ye do. End quote. So if you want to prosper, abide by the covenant. Okay, I'm sure they wanted to be prosperous. But what will happen if they do not keep the covenant? Moses goes on for another 20 verses about what God's wrath will be. The remainder of Deuteronomy chapter 29 deals how God will punish the Israelites for their idol worship. The Lord will not spare him, but then the anger of the Lord and his jealousy shall smoke against that man. All the curses that are written in this book shall lie upon him, and the Lord shall blot out his name from under heaven. The whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. All nations shall say, Wherefore hath the Lord done thus unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Continuing verses 17 and 18 of Deuteronomy, quote, And ye have seen their abominations and their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which were among them, lest there should be among you man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turneth away this day from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of these nations, lest there should be among you a root that beareth gall and wormwood. End quote. Note the very last word, wormwood. Why is wormwood the bitter root in a discussion about idol worship? In Deuteronomy 29, Moses likens disobedience through the worship of false gods to the bitter root of wormwood. Wormwood is a woody shrub with a bitter, aromatic taste. When the wormwood of idol worship is added to the pure waters of God's revelation, it makes those pure waters bitter, unable to satisfy the thirst of the believer. The result is loss of faith. Thus, Christians are warned of the practice of idol worship, which will infect their faith. We are still discussing the phrase, there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. This reminds us of the story of another star that fell from heaven in the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, the story of the king of Babylon named Lucifer. The name Lucifer means day star. Here is an excerpt from verse 12 of Isaiah chapter 14, quote, How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn! How you are cut down to ground, you who laid the nations low. End quote. Note that Lucifer was a king of Babylon, not an actual angel in heaven who was cast to earth. So many people have been misled about Lucifer's origins. If you search the internet for artistic rendering of his fall, nearly all depict him having angels' wings. His being described as falling from heaven is symbolic of his having fallen from God's grace due to his behavior, which will be described next. Here's more from Isaiah chapter 14 that shows how the king, Lucifer, was elevating himself above God himself. Here are verses 12 through 14. Quote, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." End quote. So Lucifer got too big for his britches, so God ejected him from his favor. First, an FYI here. In the next chapter of Revelation, chapter 9, verse 1, we will see another star falls from heaven. In verse 11 of chapter 9, it goes on to say that this star was a king, the angel of the bottomless pit. That star was an earthly, human king. Lucifer, too, was an earthly king. Both are called stars. In our verse, Revelation chapter 8, verse 10, this star is also a king at the time of the very beginning of Christianity. That king was Constantine I, also known as Constantine the Great. He was a Roman emperor from 306 to 337 Common Era, and the first Roman emperor or king to convert to Christianity. These two statements, the star was burning as it were a lamp, and from verse 11, the name of the star is called Wormwood. What is their significance? This star or king appears to be a source of light. In actuality, he is a false and short-lived source of light. In verse 11, the star is called wormwood. That bitter substance, when added to water, makes the water bitter and unpalatable. For your information, in the last chapters of Revelation, the Word of God is likened to rivers and fountains of water. What does all this mean? It means that Emperor Constantine polluted the waters, the spiritual underpinnings of the early Christian church. You might ask, how did Constantine pollute Christianity, thus result in chastisement from God? Constantine added pagan practices to Christianity. From his 325 Common Era Council of Nicaea, the pagan practice adapted to Christianity, Easter, was established to be kept on a particular Sunday. In the year 351 Common Era, Constantine issued his first imperial edict enforcing Sunday observances throughout the Roman Empire. Sunday was a day devoted to the invincible sun in pagan practices, closely identified with the god Mithra. Once this adaptation of pagan practices into Christianity, bolstered by the state enforcement that Constantine ordered, other pagan practices were injected into the faith as well, including Christmas, chosen to be celebrated on December 25th, which had previously been dedicated to the rebirth of the sun, a pagan practice. And these adoptions into Christian practices of pagan rites was the wormwood injected into the pure water of God's revelation through Christ. We come down to the last element of verses 10 and 11, that of the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. The early Christian church had three regions: the Jewish region, the Roman and Alexandrian region, and the Eastern region. The Jewish region was taken out of the picture as a result of the Jewish-Roman wars, wherein Jerusalem and the Temple were destroyed from around 70 Common Era. Most Christians moved out of the region. Next, the Roman and Alexandrian region, starting with Constantine, was the region initially polluted by these pagan practices. Thus, it was this third of the Christian faith that died spiritually due to those bitter waters of Wormwood. Remember, in prophecy speak, dying is specific to the spiritual dying or death. Some people may have physically died too, but that is not important from God's point of view. Perhaps it was thought that by incorporating popular pagan festivals into Christian observances, the pagan masses would more readily convert. But that incorporation was likened to mixing wormwood into the sweet waters of the Gospels. This wormwood of idolatry cost the spiritual lives of many men. Chapter 8, verse 12, quote, "And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise." We need to start by defining the prophetic terms of sun, moon, stars, and darkened, as in the third part of them are darkened. The terms sun, moon, and stars primarily symbolize the prophets or manifestations of God, the saints and their companions, religious leaders, and sometimes kings, although kings are often referred to as beasts as well. These meanings depend on the context of the verses in which the terms are found. Usually the use of such symbolism is in prophetic verses of the Bible, very prevalently here in the book of Revelation. The sun most frequently refers to a prophet of God or the religion that was founded based upon his teachings. When the sun is described as being darkened, means that the teachings of the prophet or his religion have been blemished by the creation of human beliefs or practices that depart from the pure teachings of the prophet to the detriment of the faith. And falling or fallen stars are the leaders of a religion who have departed from the pure teachings of the prophet of God. Often the cause of their falling is their thirst for power, wealth, or self-aggrandizement to the detriment of the pure faith they purport to serve. Back to verse 12. Do those events involving the sun, moon, and stars sound familiar? They should if you are at all familiar with the prophecies foretelling the return of Christ. These events are very similar to the signs that Jesus described in Matthew 24, verse 29, that would herald his return. Note that Baha'u'llah has explained that the darkening of heavenly lights occurs before each manifestation of God appears on earth. A quote about that is next. Baha'u'llah, who we Baha'is believe fulfills Revelation's prophecy of he who sits on the throne, the Messiah of the latter days, has written about the meanings of many prophecies in the Bible. This quote from his book titled the Kitab-i-Igan, which means the Book of Certitude, defines some of those terms in these verses of Revelation. Note that in this quote I have highlighted some parts through bolding, underlining, etc. to emphasize them. Quote, "Thus it hath become evident that the terms sun, moon, and stars primarily signify the prophets of God, the saints and their companions, those luminaries, the light of whose knowledge hath shed illumination upon the worlds of the visible and the invisible." In another sense, by these terms is intended the divines of the former dispensation, who live in the days of the subsequent revelations, and who hold the reins of religion in their grasp. If these divines be illumined by the light of the latter revelation, they will be acceptable unto God, and will shine with a light everlasting. Otherwise they will be declared as darkened, even though to outward seeming they be leaders of men, inasmuch as belief and unbelief, guidance and error, felicity and misery, light and darkness, are all dependent upon the sanction of Him who is the day star of truth. End quote from Baha'u'llah's book titled The Kitab-i-Igan. Baha'u'llah is the Spirit of Truth foretold in the book of John, chapter 15, verse 26. Next, this phrase, the third part of the sun was smitten. This part of the sun is thus a third part of the divines of the former dispensation who live in the days of the subsequent revelation. Just as the celestial lights illumine the world, the divines and leaders of religious thought illumine the believers in their care. If the leaders of religion are no longer able to provide guidance, they are like lamps with no light. If religious leaders fail to recognize the next appearing manifestation of God, especially if they rise up against Him, they are deemed as darkened in the sight of God. When the fourth angel sounded, the third part of the sun, moon, and stars were declared as darkened. This means that the religious leaders would not be able to recognize that new manifestation of God among them. This trumpet blast foretells the future appearance of the Prophet Muhammad and the uprising against him by the leaders of Christianity and Judaism, as well as the leaders in Arabia, those idol-worshipping leaders. Muhammad was the promised paraclete that Christians were promised, yet they rejected him. Dr. Clark does not address the meaning of this phrase, that the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. From knowing the meanings from other Bible verses and the Bahá'í writings of some of these terms, day, third part, and night, the meaning of this phrase, to me, is that the height of the day of the Muhammadan revelation, the height of its spiritual power before covenant-breaking beasts negatively affected it, lasted for a significant period of its term, about a third of its 1,000 years per the Quran, but that the other two-thirds of Islam's dispensation was diminished in spiritual power by those beasts. The night followed the day, wherein the path of Islam was darkened and veered off the path of pure Islam. If you were wondering where the 1,000-year length of time for the Muhammadan dispensation came from, it can be found in the Quran, in chapter 32, verse 5, quote, He, God, establishes His decree from the heavens unto the earth, and it will go up to Him in a day, the length of which is 1,000 years in your reckoning, end quote. That would be 1,000 lunar years pertaining to the Islamic dispensation because they use a lunar calendar. In the Bahá'í writings, that is confirmed by Abdu'l-Bahá in his book, Some Answered Questions, as the duration of Muhammad's dispensation, that is counted as 1,260 years, starting the counting of those 1,000 years from the year of the last Imam in the Muslim year 260 AH, which is the year 874 in the Western Gregorian calendar. This timeline starts in the year 1 of the Islamic calendar, which is the year 622 Common Era in the Western Gregorian calendar. The AH stands for Anno Hijra. The CE below the timeline is for Common Era in the Western Gregorian calendar. Islamic dates are above the timeline with the Gregorian equivalents noted below the timeline. This timeline shows the length of 1,000 years as being the time of the duration of the Islamic dispensation. Those 1,000 years are counted starting with the date of 260 on the Islamic calendar, when the death of the 11th Imam of the Shia branch of Islam occurred, and the disappearance or death of the 12th Imam happened. See the yellow arrow in the center of the slide that stands for those 1,000 lunar years. Note that those 1,000 years ends in the year 1260 in the Islamic calendar, which is the year 1844 in the Western calendar. Also note that that year, 1844, is also the year of the declaration of the Bab as his being the foretold return of the 12th Imam to the Shia Muslims, and his being the Elijah figure to the coming Messiah who would soon appear. The Bab is the Lamb of the book of Revelation, and he who sits on the throne is Baha'u'llah, the Messiah of the latter days. Day and night may have another meaning in this context. Day can represent the sun, an emblem of Persia. The predominant religion in Persia is Shia Islam. Night has the moon associated with it. The crescent moon is the symbol of Sunni Islam and the Ottoman Empire. Chapter 8, verse 13, John hears an announcement an angel makes to the future readers of the book of Revelation, quote, "And I beheld," I being John, "and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound." End quote. Notice the count here. There are 1, 2, 3 woes announced in this verse 13. The angel saying with a loud voice means the angel was proclaiming something, a special announcement. The verse ends with, which are yet to sound, is the clue that what was said is prophesying things to come. What is to come? 3 woes, which leads us to the question, what is a woe? From the book of Ezekiel, chapter 30, verses 2 and 3, quote, "Son of man, prophesy and say, Thus says the Lord God, wail, woe to the day, for the day is near, even the day of the Lord is near." A day of the Lord is obviously when the Messiah would come according to the Old Testament, such as indicated in the book of Malachi, chapter 4, verse 5, quote, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." End quote. The day of the Lord is the appearance of a manifestation of God. Thus, the book of Revelation is telling us that there would be 3 manifestations or prophets of God in the future to John of Patmos, that is. That's woe number 1, woe number 2, and woe number 3. As to their identities, woe number 1 was prophet number 1, who was Muhammad. Woe number 2 was prophet number 2, who was the Lamb of the book of Revelation, who was the Bab. Woe number 3 was prophet number 3, who was he who sits on the throne, who was Baha'u'llah. From the authoritative writings of the Bahá'í Faith by Abdu'l-Bahá, an answer to the question of what a woe is, and lots more. Quote, "The first woe was the advent of the apostle of God Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, peace be upon him. The second woe was that of the Bab, upon him be glory and praise. The third woe is the great day of the advent of the Lord of hosts, and the revelation of the promised beauty." Abdu'l-Bahá goes on to say, quote, The explanation of this matter is provided in the 30th chapter of Ezekiel, where it is said, "The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, prophesy, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Howl ye, woe worth the day, for the day is near, even the day of the Lord is near." End quote. You may wonder who Abdu'l-Bahá was. Abdu'l-Bahá was born in 1844 and died in 1921. He was the son of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah designated him to be the head of the faith after Baha'u'llah's passing in 1892. Baha'u'llah bestowed upon Abdu'l-Bahá special knowledge and abilities. Abdu'l-Bahá had a very special divinely ordained station in this new faith of God called the Bahá'í faith. Baha'u'llah designated him the position of the center of his covenant. Amid all the explanations, the thread of Chapter 8 seems a bit murky, so I decided to do a recap of events to pull it all together. Sorry for the repetitiveness. Hopefully the storyline will be clarified by this recap. While you watch and listen to this recap, keep in mind that Revelation itself states that it is about that which is, which was, and which is to come, meaning it contains parts that are about the present. The present is what is transpiring in the time of John of Patmos himself, and other parts that are about that which was, that's ancient history to us, before John of Patmos even, and what will happen in the future to John of Patmos. On to our recap of Chapter 8. The seventh and last seal is removed from the scroll, or small book in some Bible versions. There was silence in heaven for half an hour, from the shock of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and from the failure of the people to follow the covenant of Moses. The 7 angels are each given a trumpet. Then another angel, having a golden censer, filled it with fire from the altar and cast it into the earth, symbolic of the divine process of retribution and purification. Those who were violating the covenant of God by rejecting Jesus Christ as Messiah were removed and destroyed. As a result of the censer striking the earth, there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. These denote this retribution and purification process. The above were the results of the rejection of Jesus Christ as the Messiah by the Jewish priesthood and leaders, thus the breaking of the covenant. Even the common people bore some spiritual responsibility. The early verses were about the earliest years of Christ's dispensation, when the Jewish clerics and people refused to accept Jesus as their Messiah, foretold by Moses. Then the scene shifts to events in the early Christian church, how pagan practices poisoned the pure waters of Christ's teachings, meaning wormwood. The first angel sounded its trumpet. Hail and fire mingled with blood followed. The hail symbolizes divine retribution against the violation of the covenant of Jesus Christ by the clergy and elders of the Christian church, adapting pagan practices into Christian theology. Again, wormwood. Then the second angel blasted a trumpet, and the great mountain of Judaism was thrown into the sea. Judaism is thus compared to Babylon, the city of corruption. The third trumpet blasts, and a star, Emperor Constantine, falls from heaven due to pagan practices injected into Christianity under his orders. Wormwood again. With the fourth angel's trumpet blast, the clergy and leaders of Christianity adopt pagan practices. Thus the leadership, that's the sun, moon, and stars, became darkened. Then we get to the last verse in chapter 8, verse 13, and we are told that there would be 3 more manifestations of God after the appearance of Jesus Christ. That's the 3 coming woes that are announced. The short overview of chapter 8 is that it is about covenant breaking. warnings galore against not following the covenant that a prophet brings to humanity. Chapter 8 is about how believers have violated their covenants with their prophet of God. The Jews did it by rejecting Moses' promised Messiah, who would appear within the Jewish people, meaning Jesus. The Christians are guilty of covenant breaking when they adopted pagan practices, including idols, into their religious observances, practices, and theology. From this point, in chapter 9 forward through chapter 18, Muhammad's dispensation will be a large component of the prophecies in the book of Revelation, other than the prophecies of the Lamb and He who sits on the throne, of course. Muhammad was the first of the three woes foretold as coming after John of Patmos' time. Relatively few people in predominantly English-speaking countries, especially in the United States, know much about Muhammad and Islam. Unfortunately, there is a tremendous amount of myths and disinformation about Muhammad and Islam bandied about these days. As a result of this lack of knowledge and misinformation, I will give a brief history of Muhammad and Islam here at the beginning of chapter 9. You will see some of this again briefly when we get to chapter 11 in the next video. This must be done so that the book of Revelation can be understood. If you do not know some key things about Muhammad and early Islam, much of Revelation will remain opaque and illogical, and your understanding of the prophecies of the return of Christ here in Revelation will make less sense, if any sense at all. We start our review of the history starting around 600 Common Era through about the first 2 centuries of the existence of Islam in Arabia, the land of the birth of Muhammad and Islam. First, where is Arabia? This map shows the Middle East from Turkey on the far north central area to Egypt, Arabia, and Persia, which is modern-day Iran. The red triangle in the middle of the map is the location of ancient Israel and Judea, referred to by the prophet Daniel as the Beautiful Land, also known as Palestine and/or modern Israel. The light-colored lines are the current national boundaries, not in existence for the most part around 600 Common Era. Also note the locations of the cities of Medina and Mecca along the western part of the Arabian Peninsula. These cities play a large role in the beginnings of Muhammad and Islam. Remember that most of the land of Arabia is desert. Villages that existed in the interior areas developed around oases. This harsh terrain meant that few people lived in the interior parts of the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabian people, descendants of Abraham through his son Ishmael, were tribal and clan societies around 600 Common Era. Many were nomads, but there was a significant population in towns and settlements, usually where there was an oasis in the desert and along coasts and trade routes. Trade with other peoples throughout the world was an important source of livelihoods, including trade with India, Persia, Egypt, even China. The Arabian tribes were warlike and very ferocious. The harsh land they inhabited resulted in a harsh people developing out of it. Tribes were continually fighting, then making alliances, then breaking the alliances. Sometimes they would form confederacies for the purpose of defense or offense, but such agreements were usually short-term. They often preyed on each other, raiding each other's settlements. There was no unity along the lines of a sense of community or nationhood, only tribes and clans, and even those bonds did not hold. Women and girls were of little value, considered of less value than the herds of goats and sheep. Female infanticide was very common. Note that Muhammad's teachings put an end to that practice of female infanticide through his divinely ordained laws. The city of Mecca was a very important center of trade and commerce. Mecca was the center of pilgrimage of tribes throughout the region, each tribe having its own favorite idols they worshipped. The Kaaba, the cube-shaped building, already existed. Tradition holds that it is an ancient building built by Abraham himself to worship God. A black stone in one of the corners was placed there by Abraham, but had long ago reverted to the worship of idols by Muhammad's time. According to legend, it had 360 idols in it as objects of worship for these idolatrous tribesmen. In the year 600 Common Era, the Emir of Mecca, meaning its governor or king, was Abu Sufyan. His tribe had a major part of the business of selling idols and other religious items to the pilgrims who came to Mecca. So the prospect of the elimination of idol worship would mean the collapse of the source of income for Abu Sufyan and some of the other tribal leaders in Mecca. Muhammad was born around 570 Common Era in Mecca. He was one of the Quraysh tribe in the Banu Hashim clan. He was a descendant of Abraham through Ishmael. Arabs had since antiquity stressed the importance of keeping track of genealogical roots, although written records did not develop until around his time, around that time that he was born. Before that, oral traditions were passed down through the generations. Muhammad was a merchant, highly respected for his honesty in a time and place that did not have very many honest merchants. He was employed by a woman who was a merchant in Mecca named Khadijah. He married her around the year 595 Common Era. She was about 15 years older than him. Muhammad was a very pious man. He periodically retreated to a cave in the mountains for quiet meditation and prayer to God, the one God of Abraham, not prayer to idols. During one retreat, he had a vision of the Archangel Gabriel and had his first revelation from God. He continued to have encounters with the Archangel Gabriel for the rest of his earthly ministry. But he did not reveal his revelation for 3 years after his first visitation from Gabriel. Muhammad's wife, Khadijah, was the first to believe in him as a prophet of God. Ali, his young cousin, who was about 30 years younger than Muhammad, was the second to believe in him. Muhammad was about 40 years old when he received his revelation from God that he was a prophet sent to educate the Arabic people. Ali was about 10 years old at the time. Ali became his close associate through the years, a relationship in the new faith of Islam similar to the relationship of Joshua to Moses, meaning Moses and Muhammad were manifestations of God, that is, prophets of God, who brought a new revelation to the people to whom they were sent. Then Joshua and Ali were the promulgators and protectors of the faith of their respective prophets. Also note that Ali married Muhammad's youngest daughter by Khadijah, named Fatima or Fatima. Two of their offspring, sons Hassan and Hussein, also became very important figures in the formative years of the faith of Islam. Muhammad began preaching his revelation from God with a strong emphasis on worshiping only the one God, not idols. The number of his followers grew. As this number grew, his teaching against idol worship became stronger and began to have a serious effect on those who gained their wealth and power from catering to the idol-worshipping pilgrims to Mecca. So Muhammad began to accrue enemies because of his teaching against idol worship, very powerful enemies. One of the enemies of Muhammad was the Emir of Mecca, Abu Sufyan, the head of the Umayyad tribe. I briefly mentioned him before. Well, he and his son Muawiyah became vicious foes of Muhammad. They and their tribe, the Umayyad, joined forces with others who did not want idolatry and the pilgrimages to Mecca, meaning the sources of their wealth and power, to end. Life became very difficult for Muslims in Mecca. The merchant tribes became violent towards them. Muhammad had some of his followers leave and go to Abyssinia to safety. Muhammad's teachings and abilities reached the leaders of the town of Yathrib. They invited Muhammad to move there. Muhammad and his followers went to Yathrib, the town is now known as Medina, just in time to avoid being killed by his enemies who invaded his home in Mecca looking for him to kill him. Luckily, he had already left for Yathrib. The date of his flight from Mecca to Medina was September 25th, 622 Common Era. This became the first day of the first year of the Islamic calendar. Here you can see again the location of Mecca in respect to Yathrib, now known as Medina, to the north of Mecca, a distance of about 275 miles. This flight of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina in 622 is known as the Hijra. In English, you may see it spelled in various ways, such as those shown here. Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah may have verbally professed belief in Muhammad and Islam to save their lives when Mecca fell to Muhammad's forces, but Muawiyah, especially, remained a conniving, murderous, evil man, even though he became a member of the leadership of the Islamic community by virtue of his being a leader of his clan, the Umayyah, upon the death of his father, Abu Sufyan. Muawiyah continued to cause problems, but now within the faith community of Islam. The dark green shaded areas on the map show the relatively small territory of the Middle East that came under the banner of Islam by the year 632 Common Era, the year of the death of Muhammad. At this time, the purple area in the upper left corner of the map was ruled by the Christian Byzantine Empire, and the orange area was the Zoroastrian Sasanian Empire of Persia. Also by this time, 632 Common Era, Islam had spread only to the western part of the Arabian Peninsula and an area on the eastern coast, again the dark green shaded areas. Muhammad had engaged in military force in order to protect his community of Muslims when they were attacked, usually defensive measures or occasionally retaliation for attacks in order to get them to stop those attacks. Muhammad did not lead or condone military action solely to force people to become Muslims. Many people quite voluntarily became Muslims in those times. That did change after Muhammad's death. Muhammad had verbally stated several times, with witnesses, that he wanted his cousin Ali to succeed him as head of the faith upon his death, with the leadership to go to Ali and then Ali's male descendants thereafter. Muhammad died in 632 Common Era. Muhammad's expressed plan of successorship was not followed. Instead of Ali succeeding Muhammad per Muhammad's plan, the other chief followers of Islam who were present at the time decided to vote for a khalifa or caliph or caliph amongst themselves. By the way, the word caliph means successor. This group voted in Abu Bakr as the first caliph. He was caliph for only 2 years, from 632 to 634 Common Era. Note that followers of the Sunni branch of Islam disagrees with this version, as will be explained shortly. You've seen this map before. Remember the dark green shaded areas of Western Arabia, and the southeastern corner of Arabia was the extent of Islam by the time of Muhammad's death. But under the leadership of Abu Bakr, the one chosen to be the first caliph to succeed Muhammad as head of the faith, the territory of Islam had expanded within just 2 years to include the light green shaded areas as well as the dark green shaded areas. Some of this expansion was because of military conquest. By the way, military action was not the usual methodology of expansion of the faith that Muhammad himself used. Use of force to convert people to Islam mostly happened after Muhammad's death. Back to the succession dilemma. Abu Bakr, before his death, appointed his successor, who was to be Umar. So the second caliph was Umar, who ruled Islam from 634 to 644 Common Era, 10 years. He immediately went out conquering the Persian and Byzantine empires. The third caliph was Uthman, from 644 to 656 Common Era. This third caliph was chosen by a group of 6 men who were chosen by his predecessor, Umar. Remember, these first 3 caliphs were not the successors chosen by Muhammad. He had wanted his cousin Ali to succeed him, with Ali's descendants to succeed Ali. This map shows a dramatic expansion of Islam from the time of Abu Bakr, that first caliph. The orangish or dark yellow areas show territories added to the now Islamic Empire by the end of the rule of Umar as caliph by the end of 644 Common Era. The lighter yellow shaded areas were added by Caliph Uthman by the end of his rulership in the year 656 Common Era. The area shaded in red is all that's left of the Byzantine Empire by that time too. Note that Persia or Iran was invaded, and that put an end to the Sasanian dynasty of Zoroastrian kings. King Yazdegerd III was the last king of that dynasty. Thus conquest becomes the new norm for rulers of the new Islamic Empire. Now it is very important to understand that the third caliph, Uthman, was a member of the Umayyad clan, the clan of Abu Sufyan, who was that emir of or king of Mecca. Abu Sufyan, you recall, and his son Muawiyah had been rabid enemies of Muhammad until just before Muhammad and his army of followers were about to invade and conquer Mecca. They decided to surrender and pledged allegiance to Muhammad and his faith, Islam. But the 2 men of the Umayyad clan, Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah, were never really followers or proponents of the religion of Islam. They were users of Islam for their own purposes. They were murderous and duplicitous in the extreme. They, especially Muawiyah, were the personifications of the Antichrist of the Muhammadan dispensation in the effects they had upon it. So anyway, Uthman ruled for 12 years, but toward the end he was very unpopular. Uthman was eventually assassinated in 656 Common Era. Muawiyah, as leader in the same clan as Uthman, the Umayyah, claimed that Uthman's successor should be of the Umayyah clan. While Uthman was caliph, he had appointed many other Umayyah clan members into powerful positions in most of the provinces under Muslim rule. After Uthman's assassination, however, Ali became the 4th caliph in 656 Common Era, year 36 of the Islamic calendar, by popular acclamation. His becoming caliph was accepted by most of the Muslims in Medina and most provinces under Muslim rule because the Muslim had been so unhappy with Uthman, the previous caliph. It seemed like Muhammad's wishes might be fulfilled, that is, that Ali would become the head of the faith of Islam and his descendants follow in his place. It's very important to understand that Ali was not only the 4th caliph of Sunni Islam, Ali was also considered to be the first imam of the Shia sect of Islam. An imam to the Shia sect of Islam is the chief religious leader and considered to be the successor to Muhammad as head of the faith of Islam. Note that adherents to the Sunni branch of Islam would disagree with that, of course. But when Ali was chosen to be caliph over him, Muawiyah revolted against Ali being named caliph. Muawiyah commenced armed resistance against Ali. Armies on both sides, Ali's and Muawiyah's, were formed. But an assassin killed Ali in the year 661 Common Era. Many believe that Muawiyah was behind that assassination. Ali had been quite popular as the caliph. Upon his death, many Muslims wanted Ali's older son, Hassan, to be named caliph. Muawiyah schemed and plotted against Hassan. Some historians of Islam record that Muawiyah's plotting and threatening postures are believed to have intimidated Hassan to agree to abdicate from being caliph. Hassan, instead of becoming the next caliph, retired to a private life of piety. That same year, 661 Common Era, Muawiyah became the fifth caliph of Islam after Ali's death. Muawiyah set up his son, Yazid, to become the next caliph after him, to perpetuate the Umayyad clan's power in the Islamic dominions. The Umayyads remained vigilant about Hassan and Hussein in event they tried to claim to be the caliph. Shias believe that the Umayyads murdered or arranged for the murder of numerous imams of the Shia branch of Islam, and also descendants of Ali who could possibly become the imam designate, or who could possibly claim to be the legitimate caliph. I'm hoping that this graphic of what happened after the death of Muhammad will help some understand the schism in Islam that occurred. There are two main branches of Islam. I will not be addressing later sects that developed, just this initial schism. Sorry to be a bit repetitive, but this can be confusing on first learning about this history. Muhammad died in the Gregorian year 632 Common Era, which was year 11 in the Islamic calendar. The first three people designated as the successor to Muhammad, in one after another, not all at the same time. They were head of the faith, but they were not in accordance to the wishes of Muhammad. Many times Muhammad had said he wanted Ali, his cousin, to be his successor. Ali was to Muhammad as Joshua was to Moses. He was not chosen to be the successor as Muhammad had wanted, however. The Arabic word for successor is caliph. So this was the title chosen for this head of the faith. But this was according to the Sunni branch of Islam. Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph. He died in just 2 years. Abu Bakr appointed Umar to succeed him. Umar was caliph for 10 years. Umar had appointed a group of 6 to choose the next caliph. They chose Uthman as the third, and Uthman was a member of the Umayyad clan, and he ruled for 12 years. He was very unpopular and was eventually assassinated. After the death of the third caliph, Uthman, Ali was finally selected to be the caliph, just as Muhammad had wanted, but did not write down in a will and testament. The first 4 caliphs were called the Rashidun caliphs, which means the rightly guided. After Ali was murdered, Muawiyah became the next caliph. The caliphate remained in the hands of the Umayyad clan until the year 750 Common Era. They were extremely corrupt and freely used violence to enforce that corruption. The Abbasid clan murdered them and took over the caliphate. In reaction to the formation of the Sunni caliphate, the believers in Ali as the correct successor to Muhammad formed their own leadership, with Ali as what was called the Imam of the Shia branch. The leader was called the Imam. So Ali, for 5 short years, was both the Imam to the Shia followers as well as the Caliph to the Sunni branch. This schism would have been completely resolved if Ali's male descendants had followed him as Caliph, as Muhammad had wanted. But that would not be the case because Muawiyah basically stole the caliphate upon Ali's death and the death of Ali's son, Hussein. Hussein was killed by Muawiyah's army. The Shia imams, as leaders of the Shia branch, continued through Hussein's son, then male descendants of Ali after him, until the year 874 in the Gregorian calendar, which was the year 260 in the Islamic calendar. That's when the 11th Imam died and the 12th Imam disappeared, thus breaking the line of descendants of Ali being the Imam. Since that year that the 11th Imam died and the 12th disappeared, Shia Islam has been headed by people not prescribed by Muhammad, that of being a descendant of Ali. Shia Islam is centered in Persia, now called Iran, and nearby Iraq. Note that the Sunni Caliphate ended in the year 1924, Common Era. This book is one of the sources of information I used about Muhammad. It's titled Muhammad, a Prophet for Our Time. It is a fairly well-respected book as a good biography of Muhammad. The author, Karen Armstrong, is a former nun and has written several books on religious topics, including another one titled Islam, a Short History. And this book was my resource for some of this information on Shia Islam. Its title is An Introduction to Shia Islam, The History and Doctrines of Twelver Shiism by Mujan Momen. Now we are starting chapter 9 of the book of Revelation with verses 1 and 2. Quote, And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. End quote. Another star falling from heaven. What will it be this time, one wonders. Dr. Clark, author of the book that most of the content of this course is based upon, see video number 1, he pointed out that the language of Revelation uses many terms that are opposites in meaning. They are juxtaposed to enhance their importance in the message being conveyed. For instance, this term wealth, that's spiritual wealth, which is having an abundant understanding of the Word of God, is juxtaposed to the term poverty, which is the absence of the understanding of the Word of God. Then there's clothed, meaning someone has spiritual attributes in his character that clothe him, is juxtaposed to the term naked, meaning the lack of spiritual attributes that reveals one's deficient character. Another from our past review is the word living, as opposed to dead, spiritually dead, that is. In chapter 9, a couple more terms are added to our vocabulary. The kingdom of heaven, which is not a new term to us, but in chapter 9 it is juxtaposed to the bottomless pit, the abode of those who oppose the authority of God and or his messengers. One might call this pit hell or Hades. Another is legitimate successor, as opposed to the usurper of authority. The legitimate successor is the person designated by a manifestation of God to head his faith community after his passing from the world. The usurper of authority is a person or group that directly circumvents this assignment from God's messenger and seeks to take this position of divine authority for himself or themselves. We'll start out talking about successorship to God's messenger, and we'll start with Joshua. Joshua was the legitimate successor to Moses as head of the Israelites. Joshua was granted divine authority to lead the Hebrew people. Note the sources as the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua. As long as the Israelites were obedient to Joshua, they were victorious in their march through the Promised Land. Their successes were the result of obedience to God's laws, for God promised to bless those who obey his commandments. Faithfulness and obedience to the commandments set by God's messenger is the essence of the covenant entered into by the Hebrew tribes with Moses. The appointment of a spiritual successor by the messenger of God is part of that covenant. Obedience to the legitimate successor is, therefore, obedience to God. Chapter 9 is chock full of warnings about covenant breaking and the importance of following the wishes of the manifestation or prophet of God as to who would head the faith after his passing from this world. What was true about the need for the Israelites to obey Joshua to be considered as obedient to the covenant of Moses is true with the covenant brought by the manifestations of God that followed Moses. In chapter 9, we will learn about the deviousness of those who opposed Muhammad's covenant. Another falling star, verse 1 stated, "A star fell from heaven unto the earth." This falling star tells of yet another earthly king who would appear, just like the falling star of chapter 8 about Emperor Constantine, who we now know as Wormwood. See Revelation chapter 8, verses 10 and 11. This king, in verse 1, was given the key of the bottomless pit. Recall how the king of Babylon, Lucifer, was cast into the pit, meaning hell, for blasphemy. That is from Isaiah chapter 14. Verse states, "There arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace." The smoke denotes the overpowering torments and affliction of the people. The torment or stroke rises up from the fire of self. This kind of smoke is defined in the book of Revelation itself in chapter 14, verse 11, quote, "And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." End quote. This verse is about the third bad beast of Revelation that we will see later. This is the beast 666, by the way. We don't see beast number 3 until the end of chapter 13. Worshipping of that beast by the people is what causes the smoke of their torment. Also, this is reflected in the Quran, in Surah or chapter 44, verses 10 and 11 of the Rodwell translation, quote, "On the day when the heaven shall give out a palpable smoke, which shall enshroud mankind, this will be an afflicted torment." End quote. Here, smoke will be an afflictive torment. In the sacred writings of the Bahá'í Faith, from the pen of Baha'u'llah, this on smoke in the Bible and the Quran, quote, "The symbolic term smoke denotes grave dissensions, the abrogation and demolition of recognized standards, and the utter destruction of their narrow-minded exponents. What smoke more dense and overpowering than the one which hath now enshrouded all the peoples of the world, which hath become a torment unto them, and from which they hopelessly fail to deliver themselves, however much they strive. So fierce is this fire of self burning within them, that at every moment they seem to be afflicted with fresh torments." End quote. This is from the Kitab-i-Igan. It's Baha'u'llah's book. It means the book of certitude. Now to look at this clause. "The sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." This verse describes a king likened to a star who will violate the covenant of God. His actions will cause the light of the sun, the true day star, the messenger of God, to be diminished. This king will distort with smoke the teachings, the light of the prophet or son. That's from Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, thereby blinding the people to the true aim of religion. Here is that verse from Malachi that refers to a prophet as a sun, the day star, quote, But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall." End quote. As Jesus explained, light represents the teachings of the messenger of God, and our belief in God is established by those teachings. That's from the book of John, chapter 12, verses 46 and 47. Violation of the will and teachings of the messengers of God spreads clouds of smoke, which diminish sight. Because of the darkness, it will be easy for people to stumble into the pit of error. Pit is symbolic of spiritual death, also called hell. Verses 3 and 4, quote, "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads." End quote. In the Old Testament, armies can be symbolized as locusts. The armies, or locusts, are prophesied to come with great strength. They were given power, and to arise from the opposition to Muhammad's covenant, that's smoke, by the one who opens the pit. These are the Islamic forces under the control of the Umayyad clan. These locusts were compared to scorpions. The locust armies were given the power as the scorpions of the earth have power, which suggests the power of poison. It was with poison that the Umayyads carried out their most heinous crimes. They often used poison to kill opponents who got in their way in their quest for wealth and power. Hadith are sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that were recorded by other people who claim to have heard Muhammad speak about various topics. They were not from Muhammad himself. They are hearsay, so to speak. Many hadith are treated almost akin to the authority of the text of the Quran by some Muslims. The Umayyad kings, the caliphs, had some false teachings, meaning some false hadith, fabricated, which were attributed to Muhammad. This kind of poison that they injected into Islam seriously wounded it. All hadith are not false, but some false ones were added. The Holy Quran was not altered. The text of the Quran remains intact. This assurance is from Baha'u'llah himself. Next, the clause, "They should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing." One of the laws of Muhammad was the instruction to not compel the conversion of people of the book, that's Jews and Christians. In verse 4, Revelation once again warns the powers to not hurt the grass, any tree, or any green thing. Green means they are living, meaning those who are believers in the one true God. Idol worshippers are not believers, thus not green, and could be converted. And about this phrase, "but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads." What is in their foreheads? Their brains, the seat of thinking, the mind. The brain and the associated mind gives us our sense of self. Back around the year 95 Common Era, when Revelation was written, people did not know much about the brain, but they knew its importance. If someone got a serious injury to their forehead, severe disturbance of mental abilities, loss of sense of self and identity, and the loss of awareness of the world around them might result. The eyes, just below the forehead, allow us to see the world around us. The forehead helps us understand what we see. The seal of God in the forehead is simply how the thinking and beliefs are confirmed in devotion to God's prophet Muhammad by his followers. The devoted followers of Muhammad are sealed by God. Their being sealed means they have been approved by God for their deep devotion to the revealed manifestation of God on earth. But these seals are not physical. They are spiritual in nature, thus not visible to the physical eye. Just keep that in mind when you hear the phrases sealed by God and or in their foreheads. There is another viewpoint that Dr. Clark mentions. It goes back to the language of prophecy, just like we started at the very beginning of our chapter 9 discussion. First, we have the seal of God term, with the same definition we just reviewed. Juxtaposed to that is the term seal or mark of the beast. This term does not appear until a couple more chapters, specifically in chapter 13, verses 16 through 18. But you know already that it means those who serve the beast, does their bidding, are not sealed by God, thus the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast identifies those who have given themselves over to violation of the covenant of God and followed the Umayyah and their successors. So, those men and women who do not have the seal of God are those who have the seal or mark of the beast, the usurpers of the leadership of Islam. Therefore, those who are not sealed by God can be hurt, since they are not green. Verses 5 and 6 of chapter 9, quote, "And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion, when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." End quote. Some reminders here of time prophecy mathematics. There are a few rules as to how to compute Bible time prophecy numbers and dates. First and most basic, a prophetic day equals 1 earthly year. That's found in Numbers chapter 14, verse 34, and in Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6. A prophetic month equals 30 days. That's found in Exodus chapter 7, verse 11, and chapter 8, verses 3 and 4. Just how was the 30-day month in Bible time prophecies arrived at? The 30-day month in prophecy is derived from the biblical account of Noah and the flood. In the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 11, it is recorded that the rains began on the 17th day of the second month. In Exodus, chapter 8, verses 3 to 4, it is recorded that the waters receded at the end of 150 days on the 17th day of the 7th month. The 17th day of the second month to the 17th of the 7th month is 5 months, was stated as being 150 days. Thus, the math is 150 days divided by 5 months equals 30 days per month. We will get the math part done first, since it's the easiest to decipher. The period of torment is to last 5 months. A prophetic month equals 30 days, according to what we just went through. Remember, a prophetic day equals 1 actual year on earth. So 5 months of 30 days each is 150 prophetic days. And 150 days means 150 lunar years. It's lunar years since the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. Thus, their torment would last for 150 lunar years, which is equivalent to 145 solar years. But when does it start, you may ask? This is a timeline of some events in Islam. The timeline is based on the Gregorian calendar to help most of the viewers more readily place it in time. The timeline spans the time from about 550 Common Era on the left to about 775 Common Era. Muhammad began his actions against idol worship before his receiving revelations from the angel Gabriel. Abu Sufyan, the light blue box in the lower left, the emir or king of Mecca, head of the Umayyad clan, was a wealthy merchant who greatly profited from the idol-worshipping pilgrims who visited Mecca in their pilgrimages. Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah began their vehement and violent campaign against Muhammad before he proclaimed his prophethood. That is the starting point for the 150 lunar years, 145 solar years of torment mentioned in verses 5 and 6 of chapter 9. The beginning of the Umayyad dynasty of Sunni caliphs began in the year 661, when Muawiyah became the 5th caliph. That's the red box in the center. The seat of the Umayyad Caliphate was Damascus, Syria. The reign by the Umayyads was one of corruption and covenant breaking within Islam. It began in 661 Common Era and lasted until the year 750, when the Abbasid clan maneuvered the Umayyads into a gathering wherein the Abbasids then murdered all but one of the Umayyad clan leadership. Remember this, the Umayyad dynasty of Sunni caliphs is the red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns mentioned in the book of Revelation in later chapters. The Abbasid clan then took over the reins of Sunni Islam and began their dynasty of Abbasid leaders, which lasted from 750 to about 1258 Common Era. The seat of the Abbasid Caliphate was in Baghdad, when the Mongols invaded and overthrew them. Note that the Umayyads are the red dragon, the first bad beast of the book of Revelation. You will hear more about the dragon, specifically by that term, in chapters 12, 13, 16, and 20. However, note that there are 3 separate bad beasts in Revelation. The red dragon is the first to appear, the Abbasids the second bad beast of Revelation. By the way, if you want to learn more details of how the day for a year rationale for determining the math of time prophecies in the Bible, among permutations thereof, watch this video, Christ Has Returned, on my YouTube channel, Integral Destiny 9. Time markers for the section about prophecy math will be shown next. You can do a screenshot if you are interested. If you watch the video Christ Has Returned, the math stuff is in part 1, which starts at about the 5-minute 45-second time marker, as you can see on the right. Parts 2 and 3 respectively show in detail how Bible time prophecies foretell the appearances of Jesus Christ and his return, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The word torment is only found in the New Testament in the Christian Bible. It is always employed to signify spiritual distress. It was used on several occasions to indicate the distress of demons when subjugated by the divine might of Jesus. See Matthew chapter 8, verse 29 for an example. Here is that example from the book of Matthew, just mentioned. Quote, "And behold, they," 2 devils possessing 2 people, "cried out, saying, What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time?" Then we get to verse 6, quote, "And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." End quote. Remember chapter 6 and the pale green horse and rider, symbolizing corrupted Islam. The rider called Death, with Hades close behind. People jumped on the Umayyad bandwagon in their search for power and wealth. The common people preferred what the Umayyad, Death, had to offer rather than the spiritual power of pure Islam. The Umayyad did not care about the common people and fled from their needs. The people were in this torment of the spirit for this 150 years. Verses 7 through 10, quote, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. We must pick apart a section of this statement to comprehend its meanings. On their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as of men. The armies of the Umayyah are described here in order to help identify them. The faces were like men. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 17, where it explains that when deciding what is right, we are not to regard whether anyone involved in the matter is great or small, and that we are not to be afraid of the faces of men, but only to regard God's judgment. The application of this description then is to judge the truth of Islam by its holy book, and not but be influenced by the great and overwhelming power of the Islamic forces. Then there's the phrase, crowns like gold. Gold is the symbol for purity. When worn on the head, it denotes spiritual purity and lofty character. However, here it states the crowns are like gold. The meaning, those who wear these crowns like gold only have the semblance of spiritual purity. The symbol of long hair can be found in Judges chapter 16, which recounts the story of Samson. Samson had great strength because of his long hair. While his hair remained uncut, his strength remained. Amazingly, Samson's hair was kept in 7 braids. Islam is the 7th religion in the cycle of prophecy and is the 7th religion in chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation. Samson lost his power when his hair was cut. Until that time, he was invincible. He traded the secret of his power for the love of a prostitute. False religion is likened to a prostitute in the Old Testament and in the book of Revelation. The great strength of the Islamic forces was lost to the Umayyah when they exchanged the moral teachings of Muhammad for the hedonistic lifestyle. They became weak as a result and were destroyed. Next, teeth of lions. What is that about? There is a prophecy in the 1st chapter of Joel about the elimination of the Jewish institution of sacrifice. This institution was not completely removed from the Holy Land until the Muslims forcibly ejected the Jews from Palestine. Joel foretells that the great armies which will come to bring this about will have teeth of lions. Thus, this symbol is a clear reference to the Islamic armies. These creatures that looked like locusts wore breastplates of iron. Iron in the Old Testament has many symbolic meanings. Iron was considered as the dross which makes silver impure, silver being a metaphor for higher spiritual values. That's from Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 28, and Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 18. Iron is described in the book of Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, as that which breaks into pieces and subdues all things, meaning all peoples. These breastplates of iron can be compared to the breastplate worn by Aaron, which was part of the ceremonial clothing which he wore as high priest when he came into the presence of the Lord. Aaron's breastplate was made according to the design given by God. It was made of fine woven materials, inlaid with precious gems and supported by golden rings. It was placed over his heart. The breastplate was a symbol for true and righteous judgment. The breastplates of iron are for military might alone. The sting which tormented men for 150 years was the venom of hating Muhammad and his descendants, which the Umayyad family suffered from. The bottomless pit was opened when Muawiyah had spurious traditions, called hadith, forged, which were ascribed to Muhammad for the purpose of defaming Ali. Once this practice of falsifying traditions, the hadith, was started, it proved to be a long-standing and very serious problem. Muawiyah had Ali, Muhammad's chosen successor, assassinated so that Muawiyah could grab power. This practice of killing Shia imams, often by poison, was continued by other Umayyad caliphs and by their successors, the Abbasid caliphs. Next, I'll show you one artist's rendering of a locust, like a scorpion, from his or her literal understanding of these verses. I found it out on the internet many years ago and have no idea of its source. I held off showing it to you until you had heard the symbolic meanings of these verses. I'm hoping that the logic of the symbolic meanings will convince you that a literal interpretation of these verses make no sense, even if the picture is interesting. Dr. Clark, author of the book Understanding the Revelation to St. John, gives a summary of his thoughts about the meanings of chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. Quote, "Thus the symbols of the faces of men and the crowns like gold remind the Christian that he should judge the truth of Islam by the book of Muhammad, not by the Islamic believers. The hair like women and the teeth like lions tells us that these armies are Islamic. The breastplates of iron represent impure motives and a lack of spiritual judgment, but also the indomitable strength which will characterize these people. The sting represents the horrifying poison injected into Islam by the Umayyad." Verses 11 and 12, quote, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter." Verse 11 states they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 9, the star that fell from heaven to earth and was given the key to the bottomless pit. Here that star is described as a king, who was an angel of the bottomless pit. This is confirmation of what was already stated, that the star of verse 1 is an earthly king. Both names, Abaddon and Apollyon, mean destroyer. What an appropriate name for this king. A reminder here, a beast is symbolic of an earthly, human king and or his kingdom. That is from the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 17, quote, "These great beasts, which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth," end quote. This table is about beast number 1, the red dragon. It was the worst of the 3 bad beasts in the sense that it forever crippled the spiritual underpinnings of Islam, and it basically created the other 2 beasts that followed it. In column 1, 3 verses are given wherein this beast number 1 is mentioned with a description. Their descriptions are in column 2. At the top, chapter 9, verse 11 describes a king who was the angel of the bottomless pit. This king was beast number 1. In column number 2, paragraph B from chapter 11, verse 7, this beast was the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit, obviously related to the verse above it under A from the bottomless pit reference. Then in column 1, paragraph C at the bottom left, that's from chapter 12, verse 3, it's described as a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. As to the identities of this beast, who were they? That's in column 3. A man named Abu Sufyan, the emir or king of Mecca at the time, who was that at the time that Muhammad arose as a prophet of God. This Abu Sufyan was the beast at the start. Then his son Muawiyah carried on in his father's footsteps. After them, their descendants carried on their treachery through their clan, the Umayyad dynasty of Sunni Islamic rulers. This person, Muawiyah, is important to remember because he was basically the personification of the Antichrist of the Muhammadan dispensation. Now, if we look in column 4, you can see that this beast opposed Muhammad and Ali at first, then continued their persecution of the descendants of Muhammad through Muhammad's daughter Fatima and her husband Ali. And remember, beast number 1 is the great red dragon. Verse 11 introduces what is termed the name of this angel and king of the bottomless pit. The name is Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek. Both of these words mean destroyer. Abu Sufyan and his son Muawiyah were appropriately called destroyer. Their anti-spiritual takeover of the largest faction of Islam, indeed they helped split the faith in two, was very much destruction of the spiritual foundation of it. Now we come to this rather ominous passage, quote, "One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter," end quote. Another reminder of terms. A woe is a manifestation of God, or otherwise known as a prophet of God. Thus, with verse 11, the account in this chronological cycle has registered that the time of Muhammad's dispensation on earth is over. This may be either the death of Muhammad in the year 632, or quite possibly when the 11th Imam was killed and his successor, the 12th Imam, disappeared in the year 874 Common Era in the Gregorian calendar, which was the year 260 in the Islamic calendar. The Prophet Muhammad was the first woe, one of 3, foretold in chapter 8, verse 13. The chapter 9 verses continue after this amazing announcement to relate more events that occur in Islam, in the corrupted version of Islam that the Umayyads and Abbasids poisoned with their materialistic pursuit of power and wealth. You should have seen this chart before from chapter 8 of Revelation, verse 13, wherein it was first announced that there would be 3 woes to the inhabitants of the earth. They are listed here. You now know that woe number 1 was the Prophet Muhammad. The remaining 2 woes are being foretold here in chapter 9, verse 12. Woe number 2 will be prophet number 2, who will be the Lamb of the book of Revelation, who was the Bab. Woe number 3 will be prophet number 3, who will be he who sits on the throne, who is Baha'u'llah. Chapter 9, verses 13 to 16, quote, "And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them." End quote. The first period of 150 years in the Islamic dispensation is over. The damage to the spiritual fabric of Islam by the Umayyad is established. Now a new force is unleashed. This new force is different from the first. It will not torment them, but rather slay them. In the previous chapter, chapter 8, 2/3 of Christianity was destroyed. First, a third of the Christian territory was lost when Jerusalem was destroyed. Next, a third of the teachings of Jesus were corrupted when Emperor Constantine added certain aspects of pagan practices into mainstream Christianity. These practices were immediately welcomed in the Alexandrian churches and in Rome. These areas represented the second third of the lost Christian territory. After the sixth angel sounded its trumpet, the destruction of the Eastern Church, Constantinople, is prophesied. This represents the final territory lost to true Christianity. How was it lost? The siege and fall of Constantinople to Muslim forces of the Ottoman Empire in the year 1453 Common Era. Here's an artist's vision of this siege of Constantinople by the Muslim forces. Remember, a voice was heard from the golden altar to loose those 4 angels, holding back the 4 winds of God. They had been bound in the river Euphrates. This area corresponds to the lands and people of the Islamic faith. Since the year 622 Common Era, Islam spread rapidly throughout Palestine, northern Egypt, and other parts of the Byzantine Empire. As Islam grew in power, more of Asia Minor fell to the Muslims. It was not until 1453 that Constantinople fell to Muslim forces. When Constantinople finally did fall, another 1/3 of the Christian world was prophesied to be lost to Christendom. This part of the Muslim advance has never been regained by Christianity. This is why the third part of men were killed, meaning that they were permanently lost to Christianity. The map on the right shows the Middle East. Note that some of the country names did not exist in the early to middle years of the Islamic faith, but you can more easily understand where the Euphrates River is located by seeing it in reference to more modern names of countries. The red bordered box is the map is enlarged here. The Euphrates River is outlined in the map on the left with a broad brush on this map to easily see the path of the river. The Euphrates originates in the mountains of modern Turkey and flows south, then to the southeast to discharge into the Persian Gulf, which is between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It is 1,740 miles in length. That's 2,780 kilometers. Then we have the clause, prepared an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. This is another time prophecy. An hour is the beginning of the ministry of a prophet or manifestation of God. A prophetic day equals 1 year. A prophetic month equals 30 days, which equals 30 actual years. Then a prophetic year equals 360 days, which in turn equals 360 actual years. You add them up, 1 plus 30 plus 360, and you get a total of 391 years. Then you add those 391 years to the year that Constantinople fell, 1453, and you get the result of 1844 years, or the year 1844 Common Era. That means that the hour of the manifestation of God to come would occur in the year 1844 Common Era. So is 1844 Common Era the year of the appearance of the second woe? Note that this math was first noticed by Christians who were avidly expecting the return of the Christ in 1844. One such large group were the Millerites of the USA, who expected his return in the 1843-1844 period due to their calculations of the time prophecy in the book of Daniel, chapter 8, verse 14. Here is that verse that the Millerites and thousands of other Christians based their calculation that the Christ would return in the year 1844 Common Era. It's from the book of Daniel, chapter 8, verse 14, quote, "And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." End quote. This period of time, 2,300 days, is often referred to as the 2,300-day prophecy. This diagram is very similar to the original one developed by the Seventh-day Adventists back in the 1800s that showed the timeline for that 2,300-day or 2,300-year period. It starts at the left at 457 BC. The high, long blue arch is the 2,300-day, meaning the 2,300-year prophecy period of time. The tiny pink goalposts on the left of the timeline show the 70 weeks prophecy of when the first coming of the Messiah is foretold in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Both prophecies, the first and second Advent prophecies, start at exactly the same beginning point, 457 BC. If you want more details on the mathematics of both of these prophecies, please see my video titled Christ Has Returned. I have previously given information on how to access it in this video. I will also put that information in the description of this video. All you have to do is click on the more, the ... more, below the title of this video on YouTube. Information about the Millerites is also in that video. Note that this 2,300-year period ends in the year 1844 Common Era. This an hour and a day and a month and a year prophecy was provided in Revelation to assist in the recognition of the Christ when he returns. That the 391 years should reference a date after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, since the Christ had not yet appeared by then, was not a surprise. Verse 12 indicates that the next two woes, Elijah and the Christ, returned, will occur after 1453 Common Era. The scholars who first figured out this Bible time prophecy math were not surprised that it confirmed the year 1844 that was foretold by Daniel in chapter 8, verse 14. The number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. Dr. Clark does not remark about this number. My reading of the number is 200 million. That is the number I have seen others conclude too. Applying our Bible math, it would be 2 plus all those zeros, which equals 2. So, what does the 2 mean? First, it should be noted that the population of that area of the world at that time does not support having an army of 200 million people, even if you combine the armies of both sides. But this verse specifically mentions the army of the horsemen. That would indicate the Ottoman army under Sultan Mehmet II. Therefore, the number must be symbolic, not to be taken literally. My own conclusion is that there were two contributors to the Islamic forces against Constantinople. They were first the Ottoman forces, and second, there were 1,500 troops from the vassal state of the Serbian despotate. I'm sure there are other theories about the meaning of the 200 million or the number 2. Moving on to verses 17 through 19, quote, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt." End quote. Previously, in chapter 9, verses 7 through 10, the breastplates were described as being iron. Here in verse 17 they have changed to having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone. Instead of the color of iron, they now have several colors: fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. These are the colors associated with those substances. Fire is red, of course, jacinth is hyacinth blue, and brimstone, sulfur, is yellow. The fire, smoke, and brimstone, red, blue, and yellow, are emphasized 3 times in these verses. The history of the fall of Constantinople provides the clue as to why these breastplate colors are being brought to our attention. During the battle to take Constantinople, a weapon new to the world was employed, the cannon. The cannons employed were extremely large. They hurled huge stone balls against the hitherto impregnable walls of the fortress city. The power of these cannon was from gunpowder. These colors and odors of the ingredients of gunpowder, or the explosion when a cannon is discharged, are what is being described by John of Patmos. For 1,000 years the walls had held against attack, but the walls could not withstand the pounding from these cannons. This is a screenshot of a bombard cannon being fired from a YouTube video about ancient guns, cannons, and explosives from the History Channel show Ancient Discoveries. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, I'm not sure if it is a real firing or computer generated or otherwise simulated, but it is interesting. This is a famous depiction of the armies that will descend upon Constantinople and conquer it in 1453. Note the bombard cannon. The siege of Constantinople featured the use of several of them. This obviously is an artist's conception. I don't know how true to the actual scenes this was, but the bombard cannon was really used. This is a photo of a real bombard cannon. This is the Dardanelles gun, cast by Munir Ali in 1464. It is similar to the bombards used by the Ottoman besiegers of Constantinople. It's in the British Royal Armouries collection. And this is from the Wikipedia article on the fall of Constantinople. Here's another view of a bombard cannon. They fired shots of 1,000 pounds. That's 450 kilograms. This quote is from a Wikipedia article about Ottoman weapons. Quote, "The most famous battle in which these bronze bombards were used is at the Siege of Constantinople in 1453. The bombards weighed 19 tons, took 200 men and 60 oxen to emplace, and could fire just 7 times a day. The fall of Constantinople was perhaps the first event of supreme importance whose result was determined by the use of artillery. When the huge bronze cannons of Mehmed II, that's the Sultan Mehmed II, breached the city's walls, ending the Byzantine Empire, according to Sir Charles Oman. End quote. Here is yet another artist's view of the siege of Constantinople. Note the use of a cannon in the lower right. Again, I'm not sure of the accuracy of this weapon in the year 1453. I'll enlarge that square in the next slide. Here's that enlargement from the previous slide. This is an old wall mural painted on the side of the Moldovita monastery in Romania. It depicts some battle scenes from the fall of Constantinople in the year 1453. This mural was apparently painted in the 1500s. The circled areas show some cannons used in the battle on both sides of the battle. This is an artist's view of Ottoman soldiers, soldiers of the Sultan. Typical equipment includes a breastplate and helmet. The other pictures depict swarms of soldiers. These two images show a medieval cannon on wheels on the left and another being pulled by a horse with a soldier mounted on the horse. Add to that those bombard cannons. Now use your imagination. Pretend you were back in the time of John of Patmos and saw some scenes like this. Think of those paintings that depicted the actual siege. If John were seeing this in the visions, these weapons and thousands of soldiers involved in this siege of Constantinople, some 1300 years in his future, perhaps he would envision something like this: swarms of soldiers like locusts descending on the landscape with flames and brimstone coming out of them, those cannon, like those stingers of a scorpion. Like described in chapter 9, verses 7 through 9 and 17 through 19, what John wrote is on the left, quote, "For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt." End quote. Imagine John trying to describe these cannon, items which would not be heard of in the world for centuries after his lifetime. His description of horses with heads of lions, out of whose mouths came fire, smoke, and brimstone, clearly resembles the explosions of cannon fire. Even to this day it is a common expression to say the cannons roared. John affirms that it was the fire, smoke, and brimstone which was responsible for killing the third part of men. That the power was in their mouths and in their tails is significant. The mouths we have seen represent the mouths of the cannons. Another view is that the tails are symbolic of those who spread false doctrine. That's from the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 15. This is that verse from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 15, quote, "The ancient and honorable, he is the head, and the prophet that teacheth lies, he is the tail." End quote. On to the last two verses in chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, quote, "And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts." End quote. Verse 20 opens with the statement, "The rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues." A plague is a divine chastisement sent to purify. These last verses of chapter 9 are therefore a condemnation of what had become of Christianity, for they are directed to the remaining Christians, those who were not killed. But these survivors did not repent of their evil practices. They continued to worship idols made of stone and wood, to commit murder and practice idol worship, represented as fornication. Islam was sent to Christendom as a warning against the terrible things which were being done in the name of Jesus. Even a cursory review of the history of the Church will be sufficient to explain why they needed to be warned. The Reformation movement began in response to those deficiencies. Comments by the author, Dr. Clark, quote, "In summary, it should be noted that the events portrayed in chapters 8 and 9 are sequential in terms of the dates of their occurrence. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 Common Era. Constantine began to add pagan practices to Christianity around 313 Common Era. Muawiyah made himself caliph in 661 Common Era, and Constantinople was destroyed in 1453. The sequential nature of the revelation continues to be clearly evident." End quote. Onward to Chapter 10, A New Dispensation. Chapter 10, verse 1, quote, "And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire." End quote. Another bit of artwork to help visualize the symbols used in this verse. This mighty angel was clothed in a cloud, had a rainbow upon his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet were like pillars of fire. What is an angel? This is a quote from the writings of Baha'u'llah from his book titled the Kitab-i-Igan, which in English means the Book of Certitude. Quote, "By angels is meant those who, reinforced by the power of the Spirit, have consumed with the fire of the love of God all human traits and limitations, and have clothed themselves with the attributes of the most exalted beings and of the cherubim." End quote. An angel is, therefore, a being who has lost all human traits and limitations, and is like the most exalted beings, the manifestations of God. But what makes a mighty angel? And this angel is clothed with a cloud. These descriptive phrases provide crucial clues to help the reader know the identity of this being. Christ promised that when he returned, he would come on a cloud. Baha'u'llah has explained that whenever a divine messenger comes to humanity, he comes in the veil of a cloud. Baha'u'llah has provided guidance for us on what these clouds and prophecies mean. This quote is from his book, the Kitab-i-Igan. Quote, "By these luminous, these conclusive and lucid statements, the meanings of heaven in the aforementioned verse hath thus been made clear and evident. And now regarding his words that the Son of Man shall come in the clouds of heaven, by the term clouds is meant those things that are contrary to the ways and desires of men, even as he hath revealed in the verse already quoted, as oft as an apostle cometh unto you with that which your souls desire not, ye swell with pride, accusing some of being impostors, and slaying others." These clouds signify, in one sense, the annulment of laws, the abrogation of former dispensations, the repeal of rituals and customs current amongst men, the exalting of the illiterate faithful above the learned opposers of the faith. In another sense they mean the appearance of that immortal beauty in the image of mortal man, with such human limitations as eating and drinking, poverty and riches, glory and abasement, sleeping and waking, and such other things as cast doubt in the minds of men and cause them to turn away. All such veils are symbolically referred to as clouds." End quote. And here's another quote on the topic by Baha'u'llah. Quote, "Even as the clouds prevent the eyes of men from beholding the sun, so do these things hinder the souls of men from recognizing the light of the divine luminary." End quote. This mighty angel, who comes clothed or surrounded by clouds, also appears attired with a rainbow on his head. The rainbow is a sign of the fulfillment of the great covenant of God through Abraham. Remember, in chapter 4 of Revelation, an emerald-colored rainbow appeared surrounding the throne of the Heavenly Father. The emerald rainbow symbolized the Bab's descent from Abraham. The emblem of this distinguished ancestry was the emerald-colored turban worn by the Bab. Confirming the significance of the emerald rainbow in chapter 4, it now actually appears on his head. This mighty angel is the Lamb, which I believe to have been the Bab. That his face was like the sun is a clear reference to Revelation chapter 21, verse 23. Quote, "And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof." End quote. Taking these signs together, this mighty angel is the Lamb who will be manifested to the world and who will announce the coming of the returned Christ, the Messiah of the latter days. The Lamb who wore the green turban, who revealed the Word of God, the light, who came in the clouds of human limitations such as eating and drinking, annulled the laws of the previous dispensation, and who came as the herald of a new faith, was the Bab. The reason the Bab is called the Lamb is because he, like Jesus, sacrificed his life for the salvation of humanity. Next, about his feet being as pillars of fire. This is a reference to the exodus of the Hebrew people out of Egypt. While they were sojourning through the wilderness, God gave them a cloud of smoke to follow by day and a pillar of fire to follow at night. These signs were given to the Hebrews in order to guide them to the promised land. The Bab's feet are likened to that pillar of fire, or guidance during the night. On the day of God, the time when the messenger of God appears, the world is covered in complete spiritual darkness. It is a time in which no light of guidance can be seen from the leaders of religion, symbolized as the sun, moon, and stars. Thus, the revelation of the Bab is likened to the pillar of fire which appeared to guide the Hebrew people to the promised land. The Bab appeared in the spiritual night of the Islamic people to guide them out of their wilderness of error to the promised returned Christ. The Bab wrote about the pillar as one of the prophetic symbols of Islam. Quote, "God beareth me witness, I was not a man of learning, for I was trained as a merchant. In the year 60, God graciously infused my soul with the conclusive evidences and weighty knowledge which characterize him who is the testimony of God, may peace be upon him, until finally in that year I proclaimed God's hidden cause and unveiled its well-guarded pillar in such wise that no one could refute it." End quote. The year 60, by the way, means the year 1260 in the Islamic calendar. Verse 2, quote, "And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth." End quote. The little book which was open in the hand of the Lamb may represent the scroll which has been unsealed. It may also be symbolic of the short period of the Bab's dispensation, which was 6 years in length. He announced his mission on May 23, 1844, and he was publicly martyred on July 9, 1850. His dispensation was brought to a close with the declaration of Baha'u'llah in the Rizwan garden on the outskirts of Baghdad, 19 years later in April 1863. He, the angel, set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot on the earth. The picture illustrates a purely literal interpretation of his having one foot on the sea and the other on land. You may recall from a previous video in this series that there is a very different interpretation of the sea and the earth. Earth can symbolize Persia and Shia Islam, the predominant religion in Persia. The sea can mean Sunni Islam. Note that when the term day and night are used in Revelation, it can be a reference to Persia as the day and the Sunni or Ottoman Empire as the night. The emblem of Persia is the lion holding a sword with a large bright sun behind it. The emblem for the Sunni Islam and the Ottoman Empire is the crescent moon. This mighty angel is depicted as standing on the earth and the sea. This is stating that the Lamb would appear in Persia, the earth, and Sunni areas of the Middle East. The Bab was born in Shiraz, Persia. He taught his revelation in Persia. He traveled on pilgrimage to Mecca, where he announced his divine identity and mission to other destinations in the areas of Iraq and Arabia, in Sunni areas, which is the sea. Chapter 10, verses 3 and 4, quote, "And cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not." End quote. His voice is likened to a lion's roar. In Isaiah chapter 31, verse 4, the Lord of hosts is likened to a lion, fearless in his proclamation of the word of God. For thus hath the Lord spoken unto me, like as the lion and the young lion roaring on his prey. In verse 3, it is clear that this mighty angel will fearlessly proclaim the word of God. The angel's proclamation caused a responding utterance from 7 voices. These voices sounded to John like 7 thunders. When the voice of the Father in heaven spoke to Jesus, it appeared to those who stood by that it had thundered. That's from the book of John, chapter 12, verse 29. If each of the 7 great messengers of God received their divine knowledge like Jesus did, that is, they hear the thunderous voice of the Heavenly Father, this verse would indicate that the message uttered by this being carried with it those 7 thunders, meaning the knowledge revealed to the 7 previous messengers. John not only heard those 7 thunders, he understood the words. But John was not permitted to write the words of these 7 thunders. He was permitted to write that the 7 thunders uttered their voices after the Lamb, the Bab, spoke. Bearing in mind that the number 7 in the book of Revelation signifies completeness, the revelation of the Bab is the culmination of those 7 previous faiths. The Bab's revelation fulfills prophecies from each of those 7 faiths. Verses 5 through 7, quote, "And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth for ever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets." End quote. The Lamb, the Bab, swears by him who sits upon the throne, the coming Messiah, through whom all things were created, that there should be no more time. This means that there will be no more delay. Since the revelation to St. John was written, there has indeed been delay in establishing the mystery of God, the heavenly kingdom on earth. It is clear that the angel is announcing an event which must coincide with the last days, the day when God himself will be revealed to humanity. In verse 6 it states, "There should be time no longer." What does that mean? When the Bob proclaimed his message to the world, meaning he roared like a lion, there was no more delay. The Bob announced to his disciples that the one who all humanity had been awaiting was already living upon the earth. There was indeed no more time. Baha'u'llah did not proclaim his divine station until 19 years after the Bob's declaration. The seventh trumpet is clearly identified as a voice. This conforms to what we have learned earlier from the Old Testament. In verse 7, we are told that when the seventh trumpet, the seventh voice, begins to sound, the mystery of God will be finished. What is the mystery of God? In Romans chapter 16, verses 25 and 26, Paul states that the mystery, quote, "which was kept secret since the world began," end quote, had been made manifest through the teachings of Jesus and by the Scriptures. In the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 5, the name given to the symbol of perverted religion is, quote, "Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth," end quote. At first glance, these seem irreconcilable, the mystery regarding Jesus and mystery Babylon. But we must remember that Babylon is the symbol of perverted religion, just as the teachings of the Christ symbolized perfect sacrifice and true devotion to God, pure religion. At first glance, comparing these two mysteries of God seems irreconcilable. But note, the mystery of God that is pure religion is the pure, undefiled Word of God, such as the teachings of Christ, symbolized on the left here. Then on the right is illustrated the perversion of those teachings by the pollution of the Word of God with man-made ideas and institutions. Another one of those juxtapositions that is common in the book of Revelation. In both types of the mystery of God, the reality of religion, its true purpose, has eluded humanity as a whole. Thus, the purpose of religion, whether in its pure form or in its corrupted form, has remained a mystery to humankind. The mystery of God will be finished, that is, completely solved, when humanity receives the revelations of the Lamb, the Bab, and He who sits on the throne, Baha'u'llah. Through these revelations, humankind will gain an understanding of the true nature of religion. Verses 8 through 10, quote, "And the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again, and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel, and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it, and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, and it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand, and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter." End quote. The divine voice commands John to take and eat the little book which is in the hand of the Lamb, the Bab. The Lamb warns John that although it will taste sweet in his mouth, it will make his belly bitter. Ezekiel received a similar command from the one who sits on the throne, but he tasted only sweetness. That's in Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 3. This is strange, since the words of the scroll given to Ezekiel spoke of disaster coming to Israel for its stubborn refusal to obey the commands of God. When John eats the book, he is putting the Word of God in his mouth. The Word of God is always sweet to our taste, because we were created to respond within our inmost being to that word. When we ingest the Word of God, we internalize or understand the meanings. When John understood the savage cruelty which would be inflicted upon the people of God with the appearances of the next two prophets of God, he became sick to his stomach. The Bab had warned him to prepare himself for the horrifying truth. Verse 11, quote, "And he said unto me, Thou must prophesy again before many peoples, and nations, and tongues, and kings." End quote. John is told he must prophesy again, thus confirming that what has been said is a prophecy, and what follows will be a repetition of that prophecy. This is significant. The world is being told that this information is very important. In fact, it is crucial if one is to understand future events. This is why it must be repeated. Designating that many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings will receive this prophecy clarifies that this prophecy is not only for Christians, it is for the entire world. It's time to talk about time again. Where are we now in the chronological cycles? Let's see. This video in the course, video number 6, covered the chronological cycle in Revelation, which starts in chapter 8 and goes through to chapter 10. Note that the chapter numbers are in the yellow boxes in the timeline. You see the box which states that 2 of the 3 mentions about woes are in this time cycle. Those are the pink boxes that the arrows are pointing to show the verses in which those woes comments are located. This timeline of the cycle starts out with information about events or conditions in Judaism. Then there are happenings in the Christian world, and this is depicted by the light blue rectangle. After that, there is some information about conditions in the pure Islam at the very end of chapter 8 and as chapter 9 begins. Note that there is a pink box at the end of chapter 8 on the timeline. That pink box is where the verse states that 3 woes are coming. Chapter 9 begins with more events or concerns in the pure Islam. Then the injection of the corrupted version of Islam into the world. That's the pale green horse and rider called death from chapter 6. This is the usurpation of the leadership of Islam by power-hungry people, the Umayyad clan, who injected corruption into the pure Islam that Muhammad brought to the world. This resulted in the split of Islam into the Sunni and Shia branches. The Sunni branch was led by the usurpers, first by the caliphs of the Umayyad clan, then the caliphs from the Abbasid clan. Then in chapter 10 at the right, the Lamb, the Bab, is in the world, teaching his faith. He who sits on the throne, Baha'u'llah, is also in the world, on earth, but his divine identity has not yet been disclosed and proclaimed. In the next video, video number 7, we will be reviewing chapter 11, which is the whole of chronological cycle 4. That alone tells you that chapter 11 is a very important chapter in the understanding of the book of Revelation as a whole. Chapter 11 is next. We start with some happenings in the pure Islam, the darker green on the left. Then moving to the right, the topic switches to the corrupt form of Islam, then the Bab, the Lamb. Then the pink rectangle signals that some information about the woes is given. Then last, as is true of every chronological cycle, the topic is related to he who sits on the throne, the Messiah of the latter days, Baha'u'llah. There are 7 chronological cycles within the book of Revelation. Each has its own timeline. The cycle numbers are on the left, and the chapters contained in each of those cycles is given on the far right of each depicted cycle or timeline. Those are the horizontal bars. The colors depict the subject matters of each segment of each timeline. The beginning topic of each cycle may change as the cycles advance from one cycle to the other. By the 6th and 7th cycle, focus centers on 3 topics. Chapter 21 is all golden. These verses are really one topic, that of the full impact of the new revelation from God, the New Jerusalem brought by the new Messiah of the latter days, him who sits on the throne, as termed in the book of Revelation, which I believe to be Baha'u'llah. Hopefully this graph will help your understanding of the concept of the structure of the book of Revelation and how the chronology of event cycles through several rounds in this vision of the future after John of Patmos. I realize you may not fully understand this at this point, but as we go through the cycles at the end or beginning of each video, you should comprehend better. By the way, these timelines are not conforming to a time increment scale. For example, cycle 7 at the bottom really speaks about the 1,000 years of the duration of the revelation of the returned Christ, foretold in Revelation. That is why the bar is gold, as in Golden Age, instead of purple, and it continues past the time cycle bars above it. If you want a more complete explanation of the chronological cycles in the book of Revelation, please watch video number 12 in this course. Go to my YouTube channel to find it. My channel name is Integral Destiny 9 at the bottom there. This video helps put it all together if you are having difficulty understanding the concept from just the few comments that has been made in some of the other videos. This explanation in video 12 is what every person who wants to understand the book of Revelation should watch and consider. Okay, time to go to video number 7 about chapter 11. The mystery of the 2 witnesses will be solved. Please note that this video is an amateur production by this singular person, me. It is not an official production of the Baha'i Faith community. Copyright protections are claimed. Please do not make changes, additions, or deletions to this presentation. If you have any questions, please contact me at that email address you see there. And thank you for watching.